Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the unsettling reality of the human zoo in Paris, 1905. What you're about to discover blurs the lines between a fairground attraction and a stark reminder of colonial pasts. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. Paris in 1905 was a city bursting at the seams with innovations and contradictions. The Eiffel Tower, a modern marvel, had been piercing the skyline for a good 16 years. And the city was teeming with that heady mix of elegance and chaos that only the Belle Epoque could muster. But beneath the glittering surface of cabarets and cafes, there lay an exhibition that would make even the most open-minded Parisian raise an eyebrow, or both. Into the 1905 colonial exhibition, where one could stroll through a world of human displays without ever leaving the city limits. Yes, you heard that right. Human zoos, where people were the main attraction, were the talk of the town. And not just any talk, but the kind that made you wonder if too many absinthe cocktails had clouded collective judgment. This grand affair was staged in the Bois de Vincennes, a sprawling park in the east of Paris, covering a whopping 1,100 acres. Imagine the logistics, importing people from across the vast French Empire to set up shop, or rather, set up hut. They hailed from French colonies like Indochina, Madagascar, and Senegal, transforming the park into a live-action map of imperial dominance. It was like a World's Fair, but with a distinctly colonial twist. For a solid 6 months, more than 2 million visitors, yes, million, wandered through this anthropological maze, supposedly broadening their horizons, but often just reinforcing stereotypes. Let's talk economics, because at the heart of it, money makes the world go round, even in the City of Light. The exhibition wasn't just a cultural curiosity, it was a financial juggernaut designed to showcase France's colonial might and economic prowess. France had invested heavily in its colonies, and what better way to justify those expenses than to parade them as both a spectacle and a source of pride? This wasn't just about gawking at the exotic, it was about securing taxpayer support for the empire's expansion. The organizers marketed it as an educational experience. Come see the world, they said, right here in Paris. It was a hard sell wrapped in the guise of enlightenment and progress. You could learn about the customs, crafts, and daily lives of people from far-flung lands without ever needing a passport. Who needed National Geographic when you had the real deal in your backyard? The public was lured with promises of cultural enrichment, though, in reality, it often felt more like a Victorian circus sideshow than a noble educational pursuit. Of course, behind this facade of education and entertainment lay the uncomfortable truth. The exhibition was a product of its time, a reflection of the prevailing attitudes towards race and empire. It was a living, breathing testament to the colonial mindset that considered entire peoples as curiosities to be exhibited for the amusement and edification of European audiences. The phrase, cultural showcase, sounds almost quaint today, but back then, it was a convenient euphemism for a display of power and control. It's easy to look back and wonder how anyone thought this was a good idea. But in the early 20th century, the allure of exoticism was potent, wrapped up in the broader narrative of empire and progress. The exhibition was a hit, drawing crowds eager for a taste of the exotic without the inconvenience of a long sea voyage. It was a spectacle designed to dazzle and distract, a temporary escape from the everyday grind, and a way to feel part of something larger, never mind the ethical implications. Now, you might be thinking, were these human exhibits voluntary participants in this grand display? Well, the reality is murkier than the Seine on a foggy day. Some were coerced or misled, while others were promised opportunities that never quite materialized. The line between choice and exploitation was as thin as a Parisian's patience with tourists. In showcasing France's imperial reach, the exhibition also aimed to reassure its citizens of their nation's status as a global power. It was a time when nationalism and imperialism went hand in hand like a baguette and brie. France was eager to position itself as a leader on the world stage, and what better way to do that than by parading the spoils of empire for all to see. It was a PR campaign dressed up as a cultural event, with the added bonus of being a commercial success. If you're wondering about the scale of this spectacle, consider this. Entire villages were constructed to house the exhibits, complete with authentic architecture and meticulously recreated settings. It was an ambitious undertaking that required vast resources and a level of detail that would make a Hollywood set designer blush. This wasn't just a couple of tents pitched in a field. It was a full-blown production, with all the theatricality and drama of a Parisian opera. While the exhibition was a momentary marvel, it also left a lasting legacy, a reminder of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. It's a stark illustration of the complexities of history, where progress and prejudice often walked hand in hand. So, as you drift into dreams hopefully filled with more pleasant subjects, ponder this. History is brimming with tales that are as bizarre as they are enlightening, and sometimes they're all the more fascinating because they force us to confront the uncomfortable truths of our past. As the curtain rises on our next act, let's pivot from the spectacle to its most poignant players, the individuals who found themselves cast in this imperial pageant. Imagine being uprooted from your home, not for a grand adventure, but to become an exhibit in a living diorama. It's like being plucked from your daily life and dropped into a theme park. Only you're not the one yelling on the roller coaster. You're part of the scenery. First up, let's talk about the logistics of this human reshuffle. We're not merely discussing a leisurely cruise. We're talking about transporting around 100 people from, say, the vibrant marketplaces of Senegal, the lush landscapes of Madagascar, and the mystic temples of Indochina, all the way to the polished cobblestones of Paris. This wasn't just a quick jaunt across the channel. Imagine the months-long voyages on cramped ships, where the term luxury accommodation was as elusive as a unicorn in the Bois de Vincennes. These individuals, often referred to as exhibits, were selected with a sort of colonial zeal. In some cases, they were promised fame, fortune, or at the very least, a taste of the fabled Parisian lifestyle. Spoiler, the experience was less champagne and croissants, more about shivering under the Parisian sky in makeshift huts that were far from the warmth of their homes. The allure of seeing the world was quickly overshadowed by the realization that they were the world on display. Let's take a closer look at the so-called authentic villages built for these exhibitions. The French organizers aimed for realism. Think of it as the colonial version of method acting. But unlike Hollywood, there were no Oscars for these performances, just the cold reality of living under the scrutiny of curious eyes. Materials were often cheap imitations, and the living conditions were anything but five-star. Imagine trying to maintain your cultural rituals and routines while being ogled by throngs of visitors who viewed you more as an oddity than a person. Now, about those visitors. Over 2 million people wandered through this human zoo, ostensibly for cultural enlightenment. But let's be real. It was more about satisfying a voyeuristic curiosity than a genuine interest in cultural exchange. The average Parisian wasn't jotting down notes for a cultural thesis. They were gawking, much like one would at a circus. The difference here was the performers didn't get to pack up and go home after the show. Let's puncture the myth that this was a mutual cultural exchange. The power dynamics were as skewed as a Parisian street artist's caricature. The individuals on display had little say in how their cultures were represented. They were often forced to perform traditional dances, wear specific clothing, and engage in daily activities that were more about entertaining visitors than authentically representing their way of life. Consider the story of Oda Benga, a Congolese man who became one of the most famous exhibits of such human zoos. Although not part of the 1905 Paris exhibition, his tale is a stark reminder of the exploitation involved. Displayed in a cage at the Bronx Zoo, Benga was presented as an example of a primitive human, a spectacle that drew both crowds and controversy. His tragic life underscored the dehumanizing nature of these exhibitions, challenging any romanticized notion of cultural exchange. And while the term cultural showcase may have been plastered across pamphlets, the reality was more akin to a cultural imposition. The French organizers dictated the narrative, deciding which aspects of a culture were worthy of display, often distorting it to fit preconceived stereotypes. It was less about cultural appreciation and more about reinforcing the idea of European superiority. But why did the organizers go to such lengths for accuracy, or their version of it? Well, for one, it was about asserting control, showing off the empire's reach not just in land, but in culture. And there's a certain allure in the exotic, a dangerous romanticism that makes the unfamiliar seem fascinating, even if it means glossing over the uncomfortable truths. So, as we peel back the layers of this historical onion, one thing becomes clear. The 1905 Paris Colonial Exhibition was less a celebration of global cultures than a reflection of the colonial mindset. It was a stage where power dynamics played out in real time, under the guise of cultural exchange. And the stars of this human zoo, they were left to navigate a world where their humanity was often overshadowed by their status as curiosities. In the end, these exhibitions might have been packaged as a grand tour of the world, but they were more about showcasing the world as seen through the lens of colonial ambition. The visitors may have left with trinkets and tales of adventure, but for those on display, the legacy was one of exploitation and misrepresentation. A sobering reminder that history, much like the Seine, can be murky beneath the surface. And so, the curtain falls on the performers in this peculiar pageant. But what about the audience? Surely, 2 million souls didn't all wander through the Bois de Vincennes with the same twinkle of naive curiosity. Let's dig into the public reaction, shall we? Were Parisians simply enraptured by this display of imperial grandeur, or were there whispers of dissent in the air, hinting that not all were buying the colonial Kool-Aid? In the early 1900s, Paris was a hotbed of intellectual and cultural activity, with luminaries like Marcel Proust pondering the intricacies of human nature and Pablo Picasso redefining art with every brushstroke. You'd think some progressive thought might have rubbed off on the average Parisian. But alas, crowds at the colonial exhibition often resembled more of a rubbernecking bunch at a particularly captivating car crash. Media coverage of the event was, unsurprisingly, a mixed bag. Newspapers like Le Petit Journal and Le Matin heralded the exhibition as a triumph of French ingenuity and power, a veritable showcase of the nation's global dominance. They waxed poetic about the exotic displays, painting a picture of a world brought to the doorstep of the French everyman. Yet, beneath the triumphant headlines, there lurked skepticism. Some publications dared to question the ethics of putting human beings on display, even if their voices were often drowned out by the fanfare. For many who visited, it was less about the moral implications and more about the thrill of the spectacle. Picture a Belle Epoque version of Disneyland, except instead of Mickey Mouse, you got a stylized version of a Senegalese village. The public was drawn to the spectacle like a moth to a flame, captivated by the promise of seeing something other and unfamiliar. But not everyone was lulled by this siren song of exoticism. Among the more cynical observers were the left-wing intellectuals and artists who saw the exhibition as a grotesque manifestation of colonial arrogance. They were the ones scribbling furiously in the cafes of Montmartre, their critiques sharpened by absinthe and indignation. They recognized the exhibition for what it was, a propaganda tool designed to justify colonial expansion and soothe the conscience of a nation eager to believe in its own benevolence. Yet, for all the criticism, there was an undeniable allure to the event. The human zoo tapped into a deep-seated fascination with their exotic, a fascination that was both problematic and pervasive. It was a reflection of the era's colonial attitudes, where the world was viewed as a vast playground for European powers to explore and exploit. The exhibition was a microcosm of this mindset, a place where the complexities of culture were flattened into digestible displays for the masses. As for the ethical debates of the time, well, those were as murky as a Parisian fog. The early 20th century was not exactly a paragon of moral clarity. With the Dreyfus affair still fresh in the public memory, France was a nation grappling with its identity, torn between republican ideals and imperial ambitions. In this context, the colonial exhibition was both a distraction and a reminder, a spectacle that glossed over inconvenient truths with a veneer of cultural exchange. And what of those who dared to question the ethics of it all? They were the outliers, voices in the wilderness, challenging the status quo in an era when conformity was often the path of least resistance. They saw the exhibition for what it was, a dehumanizing display that reduced individuals to mere curiosities. Yet their critiques often fell on deaf ears, overshadowed by the chorus of approval that echoed through the streets of Paris. The colonial exhibition was more than just an event. It was a barometer of public sentiment, a reflection of the era's values and vices. It was a place where the boundaries between entertainment and exploitation blurred, where the allure of the exotic overshadowed the realities of colonial rule. For those who visited, it was a chance to escape the mundane, to indulge in a fantasy that masked the complexities of a world in flux. In the end, the public's reaction to the exhibition was as varied as the displays themselves. Some saw it as a triumph, others as a travesty. But for most, it was a chance to be part of something larger than themselves, a spectacle that promised both entertainment and enlightenment, even if it often delivered neither. As the exhibition closed its doors, the echoes of its impact lingered on, a testament to a time when the world was viewed through the lens of empire, and the allure of the exotic held an irresistible sway. As the echoes of the exhibition's impact lingered in the air, one can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of a nation juggling ideals like liberté, égalité, fraternité with the spectacle of human zoos. Talk about cognitive dissonance. Here was France, a country that had given the world the declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen, putting human beings on display like exotic animals. The irony was richer than a croissant slathered in butter. Delving into the political and social dynamics of the era, it becomes clear that these exhibitions were more than just a sideshow. They were a full-blown political statement. In the early 20th century, France was riding the wave of imperial expansion like a surfer on a particularly gnarly swell. By 1900, France controlled over 10 million square kilometers of colonial territory, making it the second largest empire in the world behind the British. And with great power came the great need to justify it. Enter the human zoos, those living postcards from far-flung colonies, designed to reinforce the narrative of France's benevolent dominance. This wasn't just a cultural curiosity. It was a propaganda machine with a ticket price. For a modest fee, visitors could stroll through the Bois de Vincennes and experience the empire's reach without the hassle of malaria or monsoons. It was a convenient way to sell the idea that colonization wasn't just a land grab, but a civilizing mission. The organizers were keen on driving home the message that France was not just any empire, but a benevolent one. They spun tales of bringing education, infrastructure, and enlightenment to their colonies. Never mind that these benefits often came at the expense of local autonomy, cultural heritage, and basic human rights. For the French public, the exhibitions offered a sanitized version of colonialism, where the complexities of power, exploitation, and resistance were neatly swept under the rug, much like your roommate's dirty laundry before a surprise visit from the landlord. But let's not kid ourselves. This was not a one-way street of indoctrination. The allure of the exotic was as potent as a double espresso on a Monday morning. It tapped into a deep-seated fascination with the other, a fascination that was both the product and the perpetuator of colonial ideologies. The human zoos were a microcosm of the broader narrative of empire building, where the unfamiliar was commodified and consumed with the same zeal as the latest fashion from a Parisian runway. Yet, beneath the glittering facade of cultural exchange, the human zoos underscored the contradictions of an empire that cloaked its ambitions in the language of liberty and equality. The exhibitions were a stark reminder of the hierarchical world order they sought to enforce, a world where European superiority was the default setting and everyone else was playing catch-up. It was a world where the phrase civilizing mission was bandied about with a straight face, despite the glaring disparity between rhetoric and reality. This disparity was not lost on everyone. Among the crowd of curious onlookers, there were those who saw through the charade. Political radicals, intellectuals, and a burgeoning group of anti-colonial activists began to voice their dissent, albeit in hushed tones. They recognized the exhibitions for what they were, a veneer of cultural exchange masking the ugly truths of colonial domination. It's as if someone had taken the French ideals of liberty and equality, wrapped them in colonial packaging, and hoped no one would notice the glaring inconsistencies. And then there was the economic angle. Ah, yes, follow the money, as they say. The colonial exhibitions were not just about cultural spectacle. They were a financial investment aimed at bolstering support for empire building. France was pouring millions of francs into its colonies, and these exhibitions were a way to justify those expenditures. They were a sales pitch, a way to convince taxpayers that their hard-earned money was funding a noble endeavor rather than a costly enterprise masquerading as moral duty. So, what role did these human zoos play in the broader narrative of empire building? They were the PR campaign of their time, a way to sell the story of a benevolent empire to both the domestic audience and the world at large. They reinforced the idea that France was on a civilizing mission, bringing culture and progress to the less fortunate corners of the globe. It was a narrative that conveniently ignored the exploitation and oppression that often accompanied colonial rule, much like the conveniently forgotten side effects in a pharmaceutical ad. But let's not forget the allure of the exotic, that age-old fascination with the unfamiliar that was both a product and a perpetuator of colonial ideologies. The human zoos tapped into this fascination, offering visitors a glimpse of the other in a controlled environment that reinforced the narrative of European superiority. It was a masterclass in cultural appropriation and exploitation, neatly packaged and sold to a willing audience. As we peel back the layers of this historical onion, one thing becomes clear. The human zoos were a reflection of the colonial mindset, a mindset that viewed the world as a playground for European powers to explore, exploit, and ultimately control. They were a microcosm of an empire that cloaked its ambitions in the language of liberty and equality, while simultaneously indulging in acts of display that were anything but. So, there you have it. The human zoos were more than just a spectacle. They were a statement, a reflection of the political and social dynamics of the time. They were a testament to the contradictions of a nation that prided itself on its ideals while simultaneously undermining them in the name of empire. They were a reminder that history is often a tale of power and exploitation, wrapped up in a package that glosses over inconvenient truths. And as we ponder the legacy of these exhibitions, it's worth remembering that the allure of the exotic is as potent today as it was back then, a reminder that the past is never as far away as we might like to think. The legacy of human zoos is like an old photograph, faded, framed in nostalgia, yet uncomfortably vivid in its portrayal of past truths. These exhibitions, while masquerading as cultural showcases, left an indelible mark on how societies perceive race and cultural representation. It's as if history decided to take a selfie during its awkward teenage phase, complete with all the regrettable fashion choices and questionable ethics. Let's dive into how these spectacles have been revisited in modern times. Spoiler alert, the reviews aren't great. Today, human zoos are rightly condemned as dehumanizing and exploitative, a reflection of the racist ideologies that fueled colonial ambitions. Yet, the narrative isn't as black and white as the photos from the era. The allure of the exotic, the romanticization of the other, has stubbornly lingered, like a catchy tune you can't get out of your head, even if you don't quite remember the lyrics. In recent years, historians and cultural critics have taken a magnifying glass to these exhibitions, dissecting them with the precision of a forensic scientist, a particularly perplexing crime scene. The takeaway: human zoos were less about education and more about entertainment, a sideshow of imperial power dressed up as a global village. They were propaganda machines that sold the idea of a benevolent empire, but beneath the marketing gloss was the reality of cultural domination. One fascinating aspect of this historical reassessment is the shift in perspective on race and cultural representation. Back in the day, the exhibitions were seen as harmless fun, a way to bring the world to the doorstep of the European public. Today, we recognize them for what they were, a dangerous perpetuation of stereotypes that reinforced the notion of European superiority. It's as if the world had been handed a funhouse mirror and told, this is reality. In the 21st century, where discussions about race and representation are more relevant than ever, the tale of human zoos serves as a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that history tends to repeat itself, usually with a slightly different soundtrack and a new cast of characters. The legacy of these exhibitions is a complex one, woven into the fabric of modern discussions on diversity and inclusion. It's a narrative that challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about our past and our present. Critics and commentators have revisited these events with the scrutiny of a detective piecing together a cold case. They've exposed the exhibitions for the exploitative spectacles they were, revealing the harsh realities beneath the glossy facade. This critique has led to a more nuanced understanding of the role these exhibitions played in shaping perceptions of race and culture. They were not just relics of a bygone era. They were active participants in the construction of racial hierarchies that have long outlasted the events themselves. Now, you might wonder, how far have we really come since the days when human zoos were all the rage? It's a question that hangs in the air like the sweet aroma of freshly baked baguettes wafting through the streets of Paris. The answer is as complex as the layers of a millefeuille. On one hand, society has made significant strides in recognizing the value of diversity and the importance of equitable representation. On the other hand, the ghosts of these exhibitions linger, reminding us that progress is a journey, not a destination. Consider this. While human zoos have thankfully been relegated to the annals of history, the fascination with the other continues to manifest in various forms. From reality TV shows that exploit cultural differences for entertainment, to marketing campaigns that appropriate elements of non-Western cultures, the allure of the exotic is alive and well. It's a reminder that while the stage may have changed, the play remains eerily familiar. As we wrap up this historical exploration, it's worth pondering the lessons that still linger from the era of human zoos. They serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of viewing the world through a lens of superiority and entitlement. They challenge us to question the narratives we're told and to seek out the stories that have been silenced or overshadowed. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a living, breathing entity that shapes our understanding of the world and our place within it. So, as you drift off to sleep, hopefully with visions of a more inclusive future dancing in your head, remember this. The past is never really past. It's a silent partner in the dance of history, guiding our steps, even as we try to forge a new path. And while the human zoos of the early 20th century may seem like a distant memory, their legacy continues to echo through the corridors of time, challenging us to learn from their lessons and to strive for a world that celebrates diversity in all its forms. In the end, the story of human zoos is not just a tale of exploitation and spectacle. It's a reflection of the ongoing struggle to define who we are and who we want to be. It's a story that invites us to confront the uncomfortable truths of our past and to embrace the complexities of our shared humanity. And as we turn the page on this chapter of history, let's do so with a renewed commitment to building a future that honors the dignity and worth of every individual, regardless of where they come from or what they look like. Because, after all, the allure of the exotic may be timeless, but the lessons of history are forever. If you've ever wondered what it was like to be part of a society where the phrase law and order wasn't just a TV show, but a matter of life and limb, then the ancient Hittites are your people. Let's set the scene. It's around 1600 BCE, and you're in what we now call Turkey. Back then, it was the core of the Hittite Empire, a place where rocks and iron were as valuable as influencer endorsements today. The Hittites were a force to reckon with, not because they had Instagram, but because they knew how to put together an empire that lasted several centuries. They had a thing for organization. Their society was a bit like that friend who color codes their calendar and has a plan for every weekend 6 months in advance. Sounds fun, right? Geographically, this empire stretched from the heartland in Anatolia, reaching out towards the Mediterranean coast and nudging its way into Syria. It was a prime piece of real estate, rich in resources and strategically positioned for trade routes. If you were someone who enjoyed a good barter, this was the place to be. The Hittites had access to the sea, fertile lands, and crucially, iron. This wasn't just any iron. It was the kind that put them ahead of the curve when everyone else was still fumbling around with bronze. You see, the Hittites were one of the first to figure out how to smelt iron, making them the Elon Musk of the ancient world. They didn't just use this for weapons. They traded it, turning iron into a currency of power. By the way, forget about coins. Back then, it was more about how much metal you had stashed away. Now, let's talk about their obsession with law. The Hittites had an intricate legal system that was both fascinating and, frankly, a little terrifying. Their laws covered everything from theft to adultery, and the penalties were often as severe as your grandma's glare when you forgot her birthday. The Hittite law code, which survives on clay tablets, is like reading a stern grandmother's diary. They had over 200 laws, and they weren't shy about using them. For instance, if you stole something, you could expect a hefty fine, but if you were caught in the act of adultery, it could mean the end of your social life, and possibly your actual life. The Hittites believed in justice over mercy, which is a polite way of saying they weren't big on second chances. Their society was structured like a well-oiled machine, or maybe a complicated IKEA bookshelf. At the top was the king, who doubled as the chief priest, military commander, and sometimes the guy who decided how much you paid in taxes. Below him were nobles and officials, who were probably the ones making sure everyone was sticking to those laws. Then there were the merchants, craftsmen, and farmers, each playing a part in this elaborate social hierarchy. Economically, the Hittites were like the savvy entrepreneurs of the ancient world. They didn't just sit on their iron, they traded it far and wide. Their trade network was extensive, connecting with the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Egyptians. Imagine a silk road minus the silk, but with a lot more metal. They exchanged everything from metals to textiles, with the occasional luxury item thrown in for good measure. Speaking of trade, let's not forget the Hittites' role in the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE. This is where they faced off against the Egyptians led by Ramses II in what's often described as the largest chariot battle ever. Think of it as the Super Bowl of the ancient world, only with more spears and less halftime entertainment. The battle ended in a stalemate, but the peace treaty that followed is one of the earliest recorded. It's like the Geneva Convention, but with hieroglyphics. Behind these grand narratives, life in the Hittite Empire wasn't all glory and chariot races. The day-to-day grind involved agriculture and craftsmanship, with communities working together to make the empire thrive. The land was fertile, and the climate was harsh, but the Hittites were nothing if not resilient. They knew how to work the land, build cities, and navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined the Bronze Age. Now, as we pull back from this snapshot of Hittite life, it's clear that their legacy is more than just a footnote in history. They were innovators, lawgivers, and traders who knew how to turn natural resources into power. They might not have had Wi-Fi, but they sure knew how to connect the ancient world. As you drift off to sleep, picture the Hittites, masters of iron and intrigue, shaping a world that was as complex as it was compelling. As you drift off to sleep, picture the Hittites, masters of iron and intrigue, shaping a world that was as complex as it was compelling. But hold up, because your dreamscape is about to get a bit more intense. You see, the Hittites were as much about swords and shields as they were about treaties and trade routes. If you thought the Hittites were just about organized calendars and stern laws, then buckle up, my friend, because their military exploits are where things get really spicy. The Hittites were not your run-of-the-mill ancient army. They were pioneering what we might cheekily call the ancient world's version of shock and awe. Think of their chariots. These weren't just any old wooden carts. Oh no, these were the battle tanks of their day, capable of turning a battlefield into a whirlwind of chaos. The Hittites had a knack for using these chariots in warfare, and they wielded them like a maestro with a baton, conducting a symphony of destruction. These things were fast, deadly, and downright terrifying to face. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, just ask Ramses II what it was like to meet them at Kadesh. Ah, the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE. It's often billed as the greatest chariot battle in history, and for good reason. Imagine thousands of chariots clashing on the plains, with the Hittites going toe-to-toe with the Egyptians. Ramses II might have strutted around claiming he won the day, but the reality was more of a stalemate. In fact, it's the kind of standoff that would make any modern spin doctor proud. Both sides claimed victory, but neither could deliver the knockout punch. Why was this battle so crucial? Well, for one, it was essentially a brawl over control and influence in the Levant, a region so strategic that even today, it's still a hotbed of geopolitical chess. The Egyptians and Hittites both wanted control over the lucrative trade routes and rich lands. You know, the usual motivations: power, resources, a bit of territorial bragging rights. But here's the kicker. This battle led to the world's first recorded peace treaty, the Treaty of Kadesh. It's like the United Nations before there were even nations. Now, let's talk about the socio-political dynamics that made the Hittites such formidable foes and shrewd diplomats. The Hittite Empire wasn't just about swords and soldiers. It was a complex web of alliances, vassal states, and strategic marriages. Kind of like a medieval soap opera, but with more blood and less courtly love. The Hittites knew that to hold power, they couldn't just rely on brute force. They had to be as adept with a quill as they were with a blade. Economically, this constant state of warfare was like having a perpetual Black Friday sale, but with lives on the line. War is expensive, and for the Hittites, keeping an army well-fed and equipped was a colossal drain on resources. It wasn't just about the cost of iron for weapons or the manpower to forge them. It was feeding, clothing, and compensating soldiers who, let's face it, weren't exactly doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They wanted the spoils, the loot, the glory. And when your economy is stretched thin by constant conflict, it means your everyday Hittite farmer is also paying the price, both literally and figuratively. The human cost was staggering. Wars weren't just fought on distant battlefields. They impacted villages and farms, leading to famine and disruption. When you've got half your able-bodied men off fighting, who's left to plow the fields? The Hittites had to constantly balance the demands of warfare with maintaining a stable home front. It's the kind of juggling act that would leave even the most seasoned circus performer in awe. Yet, amidst all this bloodshed, the Hittites were also skilled in diplomacy. Their kings often exchanged letters with neighboring rulers, cementing alliances through marriages and treaties. These weren't just idle chit-chats. They were high-stakes negotiations, where a misplaced word could mean the difference between peace and war. Behind the romanticized image of mighty chariots and noble warriors lies a harsher reality, one of economic strain, social upheaval, and the relentless grind of empire building. The Hittites were innovators and strategists, but they were also human, navigating the treacherous waters of ancient politics with all the cunning of a seasoned poker player. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, think of the Hittite warriors charging into battle, armored in iron and ambition, yet tethered to the realities of a world that demanded as much cunning in peace as in war. And remember, the next time someone tries to sell you a romantic tale of ancient heroics, there's always a price tag attached. Just ask the Hittites. But here's the thing. While the Hittites were busy with their chariots and treaties, they were also deeply entrenched in the spiritual world, and their religious practices were as complex as a soap opera plot twist. You see, the Hittites had a polytheistic belief system that would make even the most devout polyglots head spin. We're talking about a pantheon of gods that rivaled a crowded subway at rush hour. The Hittite religion was a buffet of deities borrowed from various cultures, including the Hurrians, Hattians, and even a dash of Mesopotamian influence thrown in for good measure. It was like a divine melting pot where everyone got a seat at the table. The chief god was Tarhan, the storm god, a Zeus-like figure who was constantly juggling thunderbolts and the delicate balance of power. The sun goddess Erina was another big name, alongside a whole host of lesser-known deities who made up the cosmic roster. But the Hittites weren't just about praying to their gods. Oh no, they took things a step further with some downright brutal rituals. You see, the Hittites believed that keeping their gods happy required more than just sweet talking. It called for some serious appeasement. Enter the world of sacrifices, where the stakes were as high as the altar itself. And yes, this sometimes meant human sacrifices, though not in the Hollywood melodrama style you might imagine. Human sacrifices among the Hittites were rare but poignant, often reserved for dire circumstances when the empire faced existential threats. Picture this: a bad harvest, a military defeat, or a particularly nasty plague, and suddenly someone was drawing the short straw. The idea was simple. If the gods were angry, a human offering might just mollify them. It was a grim calculus, where the life of one was weighed against the survival of many. And they weren't alone in this grim practice. Neighboring civilizations like the Carthaginians and even the early Romans engaged in similar rites. The Hittites were part of a broader regional trend where divine favor was seen as a commodity that needed constant negotiation. It was an ancient insurance policy: pay up or face divine wrath. But before you go picturing the Hittite priests as cold-hearted executioners, Remember that these rituals were wrapped in layers of religious significance and cultural tradition. They were seen as necessary, albeit extreme, measures to maintain cosmic order. In a world where natural disasters and enemy invasions were as common as bad weather, the Hittites saw these sacrifices as a grim but essential part of their spiritual and social fabric. Now, let's zoom out and consider the societal implications of these practices. Living in a world where human sacrifice was a possibility would have been, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly conducive to a stress-free existence. The potential for being chosen as an offering added an extra layer of anxiety to daily life. It was like living in a perpetual episode of Survivor, but with a lot more at stake. These rituals also reinforced the power dynamics within Hittite society. The king, as the chief priest, wielded immense religious and political authority. Imagine a ruler who not only decided tax rates, but also had a direct line to the gods. This dual role cemented the king's position at the top of the hierarchy, making him both a political and a divine figurehead. And let's not forget the economic angle. Rituals, especially elaborate ones, weren't cheap. They required resources, labor, and time, pulling from the empire's coffers and workforce. In this sense, religious practices were as much about economic expenditure as they were about spiritual devotion. It was a balancing act where piety and pragmatism often collided. But despite the harshness of these practices, there's a certain allure to them, isn't there? The idea that humans can communicate directly with the divine, that a single act can sway the course of fate, it's the stuff of legends. And yet, it was very much a reality for the Hittites. This duality, the romance of divine intervention versus the grim reality of sacrifice, is what makes their story so compelling. As we continue to explore the rituals of the Hittites, it's crucial to understand them within the broader context of the ancient world. They weren't outliers, but part of a tapestry of civilizations that navigated the uncertainties of existence through spiritual means. The Hittites, masters of iron and intrigue, were also masters of ritual, weaving their complex belief system into the very fabric of daily life. So, as you ponder the mysteries of the ancient Hittite world, remember that their religious practices were as much about survival as they were about spirituality. In a land where the line between life and death was as thin as a blade, they sought to tip the scales in their favor, one ritual at a time. And in doing so, they left a legacy that continues to intrigue and mystify us to this day. Now, as we unravel more of the Hittite tapestry, let's pivot from guards and chariots to something a bit more personal, the daily grind of Hittite women and the grim reality of slavery. Picture this, a society where women could own property and manage businesses, yet slavery was alive and well. It's like finding a vegan option at a steakhouse, unexpected and a bit jarring. So, what was life like if you were a woman in the Hittite Empire? Well, the legal system, as recorded on those delightful clay tablets, offered women certain rights that might surprise you. They could own and inherit property, initiate divorce under specific circumstances, and even engage in business. That's right, Hittite women could be the ancient equivalent of a real estate mogul, buying and selling land like it was going out of style. A clause in their law code even allowed women to adopt children, with the same legal rights as men. Not too shabby for around 1600 BCE. But before you start thinking the Hittites were the feminists of the Bronze Age, let's not get carried away. While the legal texts sound progressive, in practice, the societal norms were as rigid as a rock. Women's roles were still largely defined by marriage and motherhood. The Hittite ideal woman was expected to be loyal to her husband and manage the household, which, if we're honest, sounds like a full-time job that didn't come with weekends off or a benefits package. Now, let's talk about marriage. It wasn't just a romantic affair. It was a contract, often with dowries and property involved. Marriages were arranged, with families negotiating like agents at the NFL draft. And if you ever thought divorce was a modern headache, think again. The Hittite legal system had a convoluted process for separation, involving compensation and the return of dowries. It was like a legal tug-of-war, with both parties vying for the best deal. If a woman wanted out, she had to prove misconduct, which wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Despite these limitations, some women managed to carve out niches of power. Take Pujuhepa, the Hittite queen, who co-ruled with her husband Harusili Roman III around 13th century BCE. She wasn't just a decorative tiara wearer. She was a diplomat, priestess, and political influencer. She even corresponded with Ramses Roman II, negotiating peace treaties and alliances. Pujuhepa was the ancient world's version of a multitasking CEO, showcasing that women could wield significant influence if they played their cards right. But while some women navigated the corridors of power, others found themselves at the mercy of a system that was, at times, as forgiving as a brick wall. Enter the grim world of slavery. The Hittites weren't unique here. Slavery was a common feature across ancient civilizations. However, the way it was entrenched in their society is enough to make your skin crawl. Slaves in Hittite society were often prisoners of war, debt slaves, or unfortunate souls born into bondage. They were the invisible workforce that kept the economy ticking. Slaves worked the fields, built the infrastructure, and served in households. It was a hard-knock life, with little room for advancement. And if you're wondering about rights, well, let's just say slaves had about as much legal standing as a piece of furniture. The economic role of slaves was crucial. They were the backbone of agriculture, the same way unpaid interns are to startups today. This reliance on slave labor allowed the Hittite upper class to maintain their lifestyle without getting their hands dirty. In a world where manual labor was the engine of economic activity, slaves were the fuel, and they were treated accordingly. The contradiction is stark. A society with progressive laws for women, but a brutal system of slavery. It's like praising a chef for a gourmet dish while ignoring the fact that the kitchen's on fire. The Hittite Empire was a land of contrasts, where the progressive and the oppressive coexisted in a delicate balance. The presence of slavery also had ripple effects throughout Hittite society. It created a rigid class system where free citizens, even the poorest, could always look down on slaves. This hierarchy was reinforced by law and tradition, cementing social divisions that were as immovable as the Anatolian mountains. And let's not forget the economic implications. Slavery provided short-term economic benefits, but at the cost of long-term social stability. The reliance on slave labor stifled innovation and created a society resistant to change, a bit like a company that refuses to upgrade its software until after the third system crash. So, as we peel back the layers of Hittite society, we're left with a complex picture of a civilization that was both ahead of its time and deeply rooted in its era's harsh realities. The Hittites were trailblazers in law and diplomacy, yet they were also bound by the chains of tradition and inequality. As we continue this journey through the ancient world, remember that the Hittites were a society of contradictions. They were empire builders who knew how to wield both the pen and the sword, yet they were also human, grappling with the same complexities that echo through history. And though they may have left the stage long ago, their stories of power, progress, and paradox continue to resonate, reminding us that history is never just black and white. All right, let's dive into the grand finale of our Hittite saga. As we've unraveled the tapestry of this ancient empire, we've seen a civilization of iron-willed innovators and shrewd diplomats, yet steeped in contradictions. But like all great empires, the Hittites weren't immune to the ticking clock of history. So, what led to the sudden end of their heyday around 1200 BCE? Let's open that can of worms. First off, internal strife. The Hittite Empire wasn't exactly a utopia of harmony and good vibes. Think of it as a family business where every cousin wants a piece of the pie. The royal succession was often messy, with brothers, uncles, and cousins vying for the throne like it was the last piece of pizza at a family reunion. Infighting weakened the central power, and when your leadership's as stable as a Jenga tower in a windstorm, well, you've got a problem. But internal squabbling was just the tip of the iceberg. Enter the Sea Peoples, a group so mysterious they sound like they could be a rock band with a penchant for pillaging. These enigmatic raiders swept across the eastern Mediterranean, leaving destruction in their wake. While we don't have their exact tour dates, evidence points to their incursions playing a significant role in the late Bronze Age collapse, like a domino effect of chaos. The Hittites, with their vast stretch of territory, were prime targets for these marauding groups. And let's not forget the environmental factors. Around the time of the Hittites' decline, there were significant climate changes that led to droughts and crop failures. Imagine trying to maintain an empire when your granaries are empty and your fields look more like a desert than a breadbasket. Famine and economic hardship were the uninvited guests at the Hittite table, and they overstayed their welcome. As the curtain fell on the Hittite Empire, their cities fell silent, their once bustling trade routes deserted. By 1100 BCE, the Hittites were a shadow of their former selves, fragmented into smaller Neo-Hittite states that never quite recaptured their past glory. But hey, let's not write them off just yet. Even in their decline, the Hittites left a legacy that would echo through the ages. Take their legal system, for instance. The Hittite law code, with its 200-plus laws inscribed on clay tablets, was a trailblazer for its time. It wasn't just about laying down the law. It was a blueprint of social order and justice. This was a society that understood the power of legal frameworks long before courtrooms and gavels were a thing. Their approach to justice, with its focus on compensation and reparation over corporal punishment, was refreshingly modern. It's as if Judge Judy met Hammurabi for a coffee date. And let's talk about diplomacy. The Treaty of Kadesh wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a game changer. This peace treaty between the Hittites and Egyptians, inscribed on silver tablets, is one of the earliest known examples of international diplomacy. It laid the groundwork for future treaties and showed that civilized discourse could triumph over brute force. In a world where diplomacy often took a backseat to sword swinging, the Hittites were the cool-headed negotiators in the room. Then there's metallurgy. The Hittites' mastery of iron smelting wasn't just a technological leap. It was a seismic shift. By transforming iron into a powerful tool and trade commodity, they effectively kicked off the Iron Age. It was the ancient equivalent of discovering electricity or inventing the internet, a technological revolution that changed the playing field for everyone. Now, you might be thinking, weren't the Hittites just a bunch of barbaric warriors with a penchant for ritual sacrifice? Sure, their customs could be brutal, but let's not forget the nuance. They were a civilization that balanced the harsh realities of their time with remarkable achievements. They were warriors and diplomats, lawgivers and ironmongers, navigating the complexities of their world with a deft touch. So, what can we, the modern audience, glean from the Hittites' tale? For starters, their legal innovations remind us of the enduring power of law to shape societies. In a world where legal systems are still evolving, the Hittites' emphasis on fairness and restitution resonates. Their diplomatic efforts highlight the importance of dialogue and cooperation over conflict, a lesson that feels particularly poignant in today's fractious global landscape. And let's not overlook their pioneering spirit in metallurgy. The Hittites' ability to harness new technologies and transform them into tools of progress is a testament to human ingenuity. It's a reminder that innovation often springs from necessity, and those who dare to push the boundaries can change the course of history. In the end, the Hittite Empire's story is one of complexity and contradiction, triumph and tragedy. They were a civilization that, despite their eventual decline, left an indelible mark on the world. As you drift off to sleep, picture the Hittites not just as ancient warriors or iron pioneers, but as a people who grappled with the same challenges and aspirations that continue to define humanity. Their legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of resilience, innovation, and a relentless pursuit of order amidst chaos. And in that sense, perhaps we're not so different from the Hittites after all. In the sun-splashed Aegean Sea, nestled between the shores of Crete and the pages of ancient history, we find the Minoans, the people who practically invented the Mediterranean lifestyle long before it became a hipster Instagram trend. Flourishing from around 2000 to 1450 BCE, the Minoans were the rock stars of the Bronze Age, strutting their stuff with a flair for luxury that would make even the Kardashians blush. Now, let's talk about those palaces. The Minoans didn't just build palaces, they crafted entire complexes that were like the ancient world's answer to modern-day resorts, minus the infinity pools, but hey, they had their own charms. Knossos, the most famous of these, was less a mere building and more a sprawling testament to the Minoans' architectural genius and their penchant for grandeur. Picture over 300 rooms, intricately connected by corridors that would confuse even the most seasoned of labyrinth enthusiasts. If there were an ancient equivalent of a 5-star rating, Knossos would earn all of them. And let's not forget the plumbing. While most of the ancient world was still figuring out which end of the stick to use, the Minoans were enjoying what could arguably be called the first flush toilets. Yes, you heard that right. Flush toilets. They had sophisticated drainage systems, and even bathtubs. In a time when the rest of the world was embracing their own natural approach to hygiene, the Minoans were indulging in what might be considered the ancient version of a spa day. In terms of societal structure, the Minoans were setting trends left and right. Their society was advanced, with a complex hierarchy that managed to keep things running smoothly. They were trading with Egypt, the Near East, and the Greek mainland, spreading their influence far and wide. They had a thing for art, too, creating frescoes that depicted everything from bull leaping, apparently the Minoan equivalent of extreme sports, to vibrant nature scenes. Their art wasn't just pretty to look at. It was a status symbol, a way to project power and sophistication to anyone who came visiting. But here's where it gets juicy. Were they the original influencers of the Aegean? Well, by the looks of it, they certainly set the stage. Their trade networks and cultural exchanges laid the groundwork for what would become the Mycenaean civilization. The Mycenaeans, who came a bit later, clearly took notes. They absorbed everything from the Minoans' script, linear, for those keeping score, to their artistic styles, and even their architectural flair. It's like the Minoans were the Beatles, and the Mycenaeans were the eager new band inspired by their sound, ready to take the stage. Of course, with historical legends, it's crucial to separate fact from fantasy. The romantic image of the Minoans as peaceful artisans living in harmony with nature is charming, but let's not kid ourselves. Life in ancient Crete wasn't all sunshine and daisies. The Minoans had their fair share of power struggles, natural disasters, and possibly even human sacrifices, if some interpretations of archaeological findings are to be believed. It was a society as complex and multifaceted as the frescoes they left behind. Yet despite the challenges, their legacy is undeniable. The Minoans set a gold standard for ancient Mediterranean luxury and sophistication. Their innovations in architecture, art, and plumbing, seriously, plumbing, were ahead of their time. So the next time you flush a toilet or admire a mural, spare a thought for the Minoans, the real MVPs of ancient innovation. And there you have it, the Minoans in all their glory and grit. They may have eventually faded into history, but their influence on the Mycenaeans, and by extension on the entire Aegean region, is a testament to their enduring legacy. These were the original trendsetters, the influencers of their time, and they did it all without a single social media account. Not bad for a civilization that peaked over 3,000 years ago, eh? Now, speaking of the Minoans' enduring legacy, let's sail straight into their economic triumphs, the real engine behind their glitzy image. Imagine Crete as the bustling heart of a Mediterranean trade network, pumping life and luxury across the Aegean. The Minoans were the Jeff Bezos of the Bronze Age, minus the space rockets. Their seafaring skills were legendary, making them the original pioneers of the business trip, except these trips involved a lot more oars and fewer frequent flyer miles. Around 1600 BCE, Crete was the yacht club of the ancient world, and the Minoans were the captains steering the ship. With their ships, sleek, speedy vessels that could traverse the waters like an ancient version of a Maserati, they connected with Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Near East. This wasn't just a casual meet and greet, either. We're talking about a trade network that was the Bronze Age equivalent of Amazon Prime. They exchanged everything from pottery to saffron, and even those oh-so-coveted luxury goods like ivory and gold. Yes, the Minoans were the original bling kings, but before you get starry-eyed, remember that these weren't ethical trade agreements we're talking about. The ivory, probably acquired through less than pleasant means, involving the local elephant population. Their economic prowess wasn't just about flaunting wealth. It was about creating an empire of influence without ever wielding a sword. The Minoans were master diplomats, using trade as their weapon of choice. By 1500 BCE, they had turned Crete into a commercial powerhouse. Their influence stretched as far as the Cyclades and the Dodecanese Islands, all the way to the Greek mainland. They traded textiles, ceramics, and metals, basically anything that could fill the coffers and keep the wheels of commerce turning. This trade wasn't just a one-way street. It had ripple effects, particularly on the Mycenaeans, who were like the younger cousins looking to break into the family business. The Mycenaeans, residing on the Greek mainland, were quick studies in the art of Minoan trade. They weren't just passive observers. They were active participants, learning the ropes and setting up their own economic networks. The Minoans, perhaps unknowingly, handed them the playbook on how to build a successful civilization. The Mycenaeans adopted Minoan techniques, from shipbuilding to pottery styles, essentially giving their own culture a Minoan makeover. They traded olive oil and wine, commodities that were as popular then as they are now. It was an economic partnership that made the Mycenaeans the eventual heirs to the Minoan trade empire. But let's not get too carried away on this romantic notion of ancient trade as a harmonious exchange of goods between polite merchants. The reality, it was more like a cutthroat race for resources, with a side of piracy. The Minoans had to contend with natural disasters and the ever-present threat of raids. The eruption of Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 BCE, was a major blow, sending shockwaves through their trading networks. It was like someone pulled the plug on their economic bathtub, and everything started swirling away. Still, they managed to rebuild and keep the trade winds blowing. In this grand narrative of economic prowess, one can't overlook the less glamorous side of Minoan wealth. Yes, the frescoes and palaces were dazzling, but they masked a society deeply dependent on its lower classes. The laborers, farmers, and craftsmen were the unsung heroes keeping the Minoan engine running. Their toil built the palaces and produced the goods that fueled the trade empire. It's a familiar story, really. An elite few basking in luxury, while the masses broke their backs to keep the show on the road. So, while the Minoans were indeed the rock stars of the ancient Mediterranean economy, let's not forget the roadies who made the concerts possible. The legacy of Minoan trade wasn't just about wealth. It was about creating a blueprint for economic interconnectedness that the Mycenaeans, and eventually the entire ancient world, would follow. As we sail forward in this saga, remember that behind the gold and ivory, there were real people, real struggles, and a real story of triumph and adversity. The Minoan economy was a marvel of its time, and its influence echoes through history. Not bad for a civilization that mastered the art of trade long before the concept of a stock market ever existed. And speaking of ancient blueprints, let's dive into the cultural exchange program that was the Minoan-Mycenaean relationship. If the Minoans were the original influencers, the Mycenaeans were the savvy subscribers who hit the like button, and then some. Starting around 1600 BCE, these folks from the Greek mainland didn't just borrow Minoan ideas. They practically went on a shopping spree in the cultural department, picking up fresco styles, religious motifs, and even some architectural flair. But this wasn't just mindless imitation. It was cultural appropriation with a purpose, long before it became a hashtag. Let's start with the art. The Mycenaeans had an eye for the Minoans' fresco techniques. The Minoans were the Picassos of their day, slapping vibrant colors and dynamic scenes on walls like they were prepping for an ancient art show. The Mycenaeans saw this and thought, we'll have what they're having. But they weren't just copying homework. They put their own spin on it, adding themes of warfare and heroism that reflected their more martial society. It's as if they took a Minoan fresco, added a dash of Homeric epic, and called it a day. Now, onto religion. The Minoans worshipped a pantheon that included a mother goddess and a few other deities that would have felt right at home in a New Age retreat. The Mycenaeans, perhaps spotting a good idea when they saw one, adopted some of these religious motifs. They started incorporating Minoan symbols and practices into their own rituals, blending it with their beliefs. This was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about political savvy. By co-opting religious symbols, they could legitimize their rule over newly conquered Minoan territories. It was religious diplomacy at its finest, mixing the sacred with the strategic. But let's not get too carried away with this Cumbaya vision of cultural exchange. The appropriation wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The Mycenaeans, being the more aggressive cousins, weren't about to let Crete's decline go to waste. As the Minoans faced mysterious setbacks, natural disasters, internal strife, possibly even the fallout from the Thera eruption, the Mycenaeans were poised to fill the power vacuum. They were like the understudies who knew all the lines by heart, just waiting in the wings for their big break. And here's where it gets really juicy, the political intrigue. While the Minoans were busy dealing with their existential crises, the Mycenaeans were plotting their rise to fame. Around 1450 BCE, they seized control of Crete, taking over Knossos and other key sites. This wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was a strategic move to control the trade networks that had made the Minoans rich. The Mycenaeans were smart. They knew that power wasn't just about land. It was about influence, resources, and let's face it, having the best ships on the Aegean. This rise of Mycenae coincided with the mysterious decline of Minoan Crete, but let's not jump to the Atlantis conclusion just yet. The myth of Atlantis, popularized by none other than Plato, paints a picture of a utopian society that vanished beneath the waves. It's a romantic notion, sure, but it's about as historical as a Hollywood blockbuster. The real story is probably less about catastrophic deluges and more about the slow burn of economic and social upheaval. Natural disasters, like the Thera eruption, played a role, but so did shifts in trade routes and political alliances. The Mycenaeans didn't need a lost continent to explain their rise. They just needed a series of unfortunate events that left their rivals vulnerable. So while the legend of Atlantis tempts us with visions of sunken cities and lost treasures, the reality is more complex. The Mycenaeans didn't just inherit the Minoan legacy. They adapted it, rebranded it, and used it to fuel their own ambitions. They were the entrepreneurs of their age, turning Minoan setbacks into Mycenaean successes. It was a masterclass in cultural and political adaptation, proving that sometimes the best way to conquer is not with swords, but with savvy. As we sail further into this historical saga, let's keep in mind that the past is never as simple as it seems. Behind every fresco, every myth, there's a tale of power struggles, cultural exchanges, and human ingenuity. The Mycenaeans were more than just heirs to the Minoan throne. They were architects of a new era, setting the stage for what would eventually become classical Greece. And while the Minoans may have faded into history, their influence lived on, etched into the very fabric of Mycenaean culture. Now, with the stage set and the players in place, we'll journey deeper into the heart of Mycenaean dominance, because this story is far from over. Here we go. As the Mycenaeans flexed their muscles and took the helm, the Minoan civilization found itself in the throes of a dramatic decline that's been the subject of speculation, debate, and more than a few wild theories. Was it a colossal volcanic eruption that did them in, or was it a perfect storm of disasters and human failings? Let's dive into the evidence and see what the archaeological clues and historical records tell us. First up, the Thera eruption. Around 1600 BCE, the island of Thera, known today as Santorini, decided to put on a fireworks display that would make the 4th of July look like a candlelit dinner. This was no ordinary eruption. It was a cataclysmic event that spewed ash and pumice across the region, affecting climate and agriculture. To put it in perspective, the eruption was about 4 times more powerful than Krakatoa's infamous blast in 1883. The ash cloud would have dimmed the skies over Crete, causing crop failures and possibly even triggering a mini ice age. It was like Mother Nature decided to hit the reset button on the Aegean world. But let's not pin the Minoans' demise solely on the Thera eruption. While it's tempting to imagine a single dramatic event wiping out a civilization, the truth is usually messier. Think of the eruption as the opening act in a tragic play of natural disasters and human hubris. Earthquakes frequently rocked Crete, and evidence suggests that around the same time as Thera's tantrum, the island experienced a series of significant quakes. The palaces, with all their architectural brilliance, might have been built to withstand the odd tremor, but a sustained seismic assault, that could have been a different story. Now, add to this the toll on Minoan trade. With their ships navigating ash-choked waters and their agricultural output compromised, the Minoans found themselves in a precarious position. Their trading partners, always looking for the next best deal, might have started eyeing other up-and-coming economies. Enter the Mycenaeans, who were all too happy to step in and fill the gap. They were like the savvy entrepreneurs who saw an opportunity and pounced, expanding their own networks while the Minoans were busy picking up the pieces. But it wasn't just about nature throwing a tantrum. The Minoans, for all their sophistication, were not immune to internal strife and social upheaval. There's evidence suggesting that the Minoan society was already experiencing stress fractures before the natural disasters hit. Signs of violence, including weaponry and fortified structures, hint at potential conflicts. Could it be that as resources became scarcer, the social fabric began to unravel? It's a classic tale of the haves and the have-nots, a struggle as old as civilization itself. While the Minoans were wrestling with these challenges, the Mycenaeans were sharpening their swords. both literally and figuratively. They weren't just biding their time, they were meticulously preparing for their ascent. The Mycenaeans, who had been under the Minoan spell, were now ready to write their own chapter of history. By around 1450 BCE, they seized control of Crete. This wasn't just a hostile takeover, it was a transfer of power that had been brewing for decades. The Mycenaeans had been taking notes, learning the tricks of the trade, and now they were ready to put that knowledge to use. And what did the Mycenaeans do with their newfound power? They embarked on a campaign of expansion and consolidation. They took the Minoan playbook, revised it with a focus on militaristic prowess, and set out to dominate the Aegean world. They fortified their cities, like Mycenae and Turins, with massive walls, a testament to their emphasis on defense and military might. These weren't just walls, they were colossal structures that would make even the builders of the Great Wall of China nod in approval. The Mycenaeans also knew the value of a good story. They infused their culture with tales of heroism and adventure, which later inspired the epic poetry of Homer. The legends of Achilles, Agamemnon, and Odysseus didn't spring from thin air. They were rooted in the Mycenaean tradition of celebrating warriors and kings. It was a narrative shift from the Minoan focus on art and trade to one of conquest and glory. While the Mycenaeans were busy carving out their legacy, the Minoans faded into history. But let's not romanticize their end as an enigmatic vanishing act. Reality was likely a gradual decline, marked by a series of unfortunate events and strategic missteps. The Minoans didn't disappear overnight. They were absorbed, assimilated, their culture leaving an indelible mark on their successors. The Mycenaeans, ever the opportunists, were the beneficiaries of this cultural inheritance, shaping it into their own distinct identity. As we move forward, remember that the rise of Mycenaean dominance wasn't just a matter of military might. It was a complex interplay of natural disasters, economic shifts, and cultural adaptation. The Mycenaeans were more than just conquerors. They were innovators, architects of a new age that would lay the groundwork for the glories of classical Greece. And while the Minoans may have set the stage, the Mycenaeans were the ones who brought down the house. Stay tuned, because the saga of Mycenaean Greece is just getting started, and it promises to be an epic tale of ambition, power, and of course, a fair share of drama. So, as the Mycenaean saga unfolded with all the drama of a Shakespearean play, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture, something the Mycenaeans themselves were quite adept at. Their story isn't just one of conquest. It's a tale of cultural evolution, where Minoan threads are woven into the fabric of Mycenaean and eventually classical Greek civilization. It's like watching a blockbuster trilogy unfold, where the sequel has all the action of the original, but with a plot twist that sets the stage for the grand finale. First, let's talk about the art. The Minoans, with their knack for vibrant frescoes and intricate pottery, left an indelible mark on the Mycenaeans. These mainlanders took Minoan artistry and gave it a twist. Think less peaceful dolphin scenes and more lion hunts fit for a king's tomb. While the Minoans were about capturing the joie de vivre of daily life, the Mycenaeans were painting their aspirations for power and dominance. They were the gritty reboot to the Minoans' colorful classic, channeling the same artistic energy into something that spoke to their own ideals of heroism and strength. This artistic evolution didn't stop there. It rippled through time, influencing the sculptors of classical Greece, who would later carve out the marble wonders that still define Western art. Now, onto language and writing. The Minoans' linear script was a complex puzzle that still keeps linguists up at night, like trying to solve a crossword with half the clues missing. The Mycenaeans, however, developed Linear B, a script we thankfully can read, which they used to keep meticulous records. These tablets reveal not just grocery lists and palace inventories, but a society deeply connected to its Minoan predecessors. The Mycenaeans didn't just adopt a writing system, they adapted it, making it their own, laying the groundwork for the Greek alphabet that would eventually birth Western literature. It's a bit like inheriting a dusty old typewriter and using it to write the next great American novel. Speaking of literature, let's not forget the legends. The stories of the Trojan War, immortalized by Homer, owe much to the Mycenaean age. But here's the kicker. Those epic tales, with their heroes and battles, are steeped in the cultural exchanges between Mycenaeans and Minoans. The romanticized image of the golden age of heroes might gloss over the gritty details, like the constant threat of piracy and the less-than-heroic reality of ancient warfare. Yet these myths, blending Minoan and Mycenaean influences, became the bedrock of Western storytelling. They're the ancient equivalent of a summer blockbuster. Big, bold, and not entirely accurate, but undeniably compelling. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. The myths are enchanting, sure, but the real story is far more nuanced. The Minoans weren't a peace-loving utopia, nor were the Mycenaeans merely warmongers. They were societies of complexity and contradiction, where trade and war, art and politics coexisted in a delicate dance. The Minoans may have set the stage with their innovations, but the Mycenaeans were the ones who performed the main act, adding their own flair to the script. And what about the everyday folks who lived through these transitions? While kings and warriors stole the spotlight, it was the artisans, traders, and farmers who kept the wheels turning. The Minoans and Mycenaeans weren't just about palaces and power. They were about communities striving to thrive in a challenging world. The legacy they left wasn't just in stone and story, but in the societal advancements that would echo through time. The Mycenaeans might have conquered Minoan lands, but they also inherited their innovations, from agricultural practices to maritime technology, which fueled their own ascent to power. So, what lessons can we draw from this ancient saga? For one, civilizations rise not just through conquest, but through cultural synthesis. The Minoans and Mycenaeans show us that true strength lies in adaptability, in taking the best of what came before and making it your own. It's a lesson in resilience and reinvention, something that resonates even today. Whether it's the fusion of art styles or the adoption of technology, the past teaches us that progress often comes from collaboration, not isolation. And as we gaze upon the ruins of Knossos or the citadel of Mycenae, let's remember that these aren't just piles of ancient stones. They are the remnants of a human story, a testament to the creativity, ambition, and resilience that have propelled civilizations forward. The Minoans may have laid the foundations, but it was the Mycenaeans who built upon them, crafting a legacy that would endure through the ages. In the end, the tale of Minoan and Mycenaean influence is a reminder that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about people, visionaries, builders, dreamers, who dared to imagine a future beyond their immediate horizon. As we look to our own future, perhaps there's wisdom to be drawn from these ancient architects of civilization. They navigated a world of uncertainty with ingenuity and courage, leaving behind a cultural tapestry that still captivates us today. So, here's to the Minoans and Mycenaeans. May their story continue to inspire us, challenge us, and remind us of the enduring power of human creativity. In the land of the rising sun, where honor and duty often danced a delicate waltz, one man decided to kick the whole orchestra over and start a rock band. Enter Emperor Go-Daigo, the teenage rebel-turned-leader with more than a chip on his shoulder, more like a whole boulder. This wasn't your average princeling content to shuffle papers and pose for portraits. No, Go-Daigo was a man with a plan, a dream so big it could barely fit into his imperial kimono. Born in 1288, Takaharu, later to be known as Go-Daigo, entered a world as intricate as a bonsai tree. His early years were steeped in political intrigue, the kind where you couldn't tell if someone wanted to shake your hand or stab you in the back. Royal life wasn't all tea ceremonies and poetry recitals. It was a high-stakes game of thrones, and young Takaharu had front-row seats. He was the son of Emperor Go-Yuda, and to say he had ambition is like saying Mount Fuji is a bit of a hill. Now, let's talk about teenage Go-Daigo. If you've ever been a teenager, you know rebellion is practically a rite of passage. But while some teens sneak out to parties, Go-Daigo was plotting how to reshape the entire Japanese political landscape. He might not have had TikTok, but he was definitely going viral in the corridors of power, surrounded by regents and advisors who preferred the status quo like sushi on a conveyor belt. Go-Daigo's ambition was as conspicuous as a sumo wrestler in a tea house. In 1318, at the tender age of 30, considered practically middle-aged in a time when life expectancy hovered around 50, our man Go-Daigo ascended to the chrysanthemum throne. It was a Japan teetering on the edge of economic collapse, like a samurai just one sword away from losing a duel. The Bakufu, or military government, controlled by the Hojo clan, was the real power behind the imperial curtain. Think of Go-Daigo as the proverbial puppet emperor, with strings pulled by a puppet master who didn't quite believe in subtlety. The country was knee-deep in social unrest, with rice prices skyrocketing faster than a ninja scaling a wall. Famine and poverty were the dish of the day, and the people were hungry for change, literally and figuratively. Go-Daigo, ever the innovator, wasn't content to be a figurehead. He had grand visions of restoring imperial rule, dreams that likely kept him awake at night more than any ghost story. But let's not romanticize his ambition too much. This was no selfless act of altruism. Go-Daigo wanted power, and he wanted it bad. He had a knack for making bold moves, like a chess player who'd rather flip the board than accept a stalemate. He wasn't afraid to step on a few toes, or more accurately, trample them with a parade of war horses, if that's what it took to get what he wanted. The Hojo clan, the real power players, had turned the shogunate into their personal playground, and Go-Daigo wasn't invited to the party. He wanted to change that, and he didn't care how many samurai he needed to ruffle to do it. In a world where alliances were as stable as a paper umbrella in a typhoon, Go-Daigo's quest for power was the ultimate high-wire act. One might wonder why Go-Daigo didn't just settle for a life of luxury, sipping sake while composing haikus. The truth is, he wasn't the type to sit back and let someone else write his story. Go-Daigo was a rebel with a cause, and that cause was absolute power. It was a gamble, and Go-Daigo was all in, chips and all. Whether he was a visionary or just a man with a dangerous case of ambition, history would decide. So here we have him, Emperor Go-Daigo, Japan's rebel with more than just a cause. A man with a mission, a maverick in an era where mavericks didn't just get side-eye, they got arrows. As we delve deeper into his reign, remember this. Go-Daigo wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting the rules. And so, Emperor Go-Daigo, our maverick monarch, wasn't content to be another pawn in the game of thrones played by the Hojo shogunate. Nope, he was aiming to flip the board and make the pieces dance to his tune. The Kamakura shogunate had been the top dog in Japan since 1185, reigning supreme like an ancient version of a long-running reality TV show. But Go-Daigo had a plan to change the channel, permanently. Let's dive into this grand scheme of his, starting with the Genko War of 1331. Picture this. Go-Daigo, not exactly a military genius, but a man with serious ambition, was convinced he could snatch power from the Hojo clan. He wasn't marching into battle with a sword in hand, more like wielding a grand vision and a hefty dose of wishful thinking. With military resources tighter than a samurai's topknot, he had to rely on support from dissident samurai and minor lords, who were about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The Genko War was Go-Daigo's opening act, his attempt to stage a coup that would make headlines if medieval Japan had tabloids. It started with a bang, or maybe just a loud clatter, as he rallied his followers to take up arms against the shogunate. This wasn't just any uprising, it was a full-blown rebellion, the kind that makes historians salivate over the juicy details. For Go-Daigo, the stakes were sky-high. The Kamakura shogunate was like a fortress, with layers of power fortified by the Hojo clan's control. These guys had been running the show for over a century, and they weren't about to roll over for a dreamer with delusions of grandeur. Go-Daigo's strategy, to strip them of that power and restore the emperor's authority, like a conductor reclaiming the baton from an overzealous orchestra. But of course, it wasn't going to be easy. The shogunate had resources, allies, and a knack for quashing rebellions like bugs on a summer night. By 1331, Go-Daigo found himself on the run, a would-be emperor without a throne. The plan was unraveling faster than a poorly tied obi. Captured and exiled to Oki Island, Go-Daigo's dreams seemed to have hit a rather inconvenient roadblock. Yet, even in exile, he was plotting his next move, his mind a whirl of strategy and ambition. Meanwhile, back in the mainland, the socio-economic climate was ripe for rebellion. The peasants, squeezed by taxes and the ever-rising cost of rice, were fed up. The samurai class, burdened by debts and frustrated with the Hojo's tight grip, saw the appeal in Go-Daigo's vision of restoring imperial power. It wasn't just a political struggle. It was a social tinderbox ready to ignite. You could say that Go-Daigo's rebellion found an audience starving for a plot twist. The Hojo clan was aware of the brewing discontent and the emperor's persistent ambition. They tried to maintain their grip by deploying their forces, but the cracks were starting to show. Think of it like a medieval game of Jenga. One wrong move, and the whole structure might come tumbling down. And Go-Daigo, he was more than willing to give that tower a good shake. By 1333, Go-Daigo's fortunes took a turn, thanks to a combination of luck, support from discontented samurai, and his own stubborn persistence. He managed to escape from exile and rally his forces once more. Enter Ashikaga Takoji, a shogunate general with dreams of his own. This guy saw an opportunity in Go-Daigo's cause and decided to switch sides, handing the emperor a critical boost. It was a twist worthy of any soap opera, with allegiances shifting faster than a ninja's costume changes. The final showdown came when Go-Daigo's forces, bolstered by Takoji's defection, marched on Kamakura, the shogunate's stronghold. The Hojo, caught off guard by the betrayal and the emperor's relentless drive, crumbled like a house of cards. It was a dramatic conclusion to an epic struggle, with the Hojo's power dismantled and Go-Daigo reclaiming the throne. In 1333, he entered Kyoto not just as an emperor, but as a victor, ready to rewrite the rules of power. Yet, as the dust settled and Go-Daigo began to implement his vision, it became clear that victory in battle was just the beginning. The real challenge lay in governing a fractured nation, appeasing the diverse interests that had supported him, and maintaining the delicate balance of power. The Genko War had ended, but the story was far from over. Go-Daigo's reign was about to face new trials, where ambition and reality would clash once more. So there you have it. Go-Daigo's bold gamble paid off, at least for now. The Kamakura shogunate had met its end, and the emperor's dream of restoring imperial rule had become a tantalizing reality. But as any good storyteller knows, every victory sets the stage for the next conflict. And Go-Daigo, he was about to find out that ruling was a whole different battlefield. Stay tuned, because this tale of ambition, power, and intrigue is just getting started. And so, Go-Daigo, the emperor who had taken on the role of a revolutionary rather than a mere figurehead, found himself in a position that many a rebel leader dreams of, but few actually achieve, sitting on the throne with the power to enact his vision. But if history has taught us anything, it's that winning the throne is like buying a gym membership. The real challenge is actually using it. Welcome to the Kenmu Restoration, a grandiose name for what was essentially a short-lived attempt to reinvigorate imperial authority, an endeavor with all the staying power of a New Year's diet plan. The year was 1333, and Go-Daigo was ready to roll up his sleeves and get to work. His vision was simple: restore the emperor to a position of absolute power, reviving the glory days of imperial rule. The reality, more complicated than assembling flat-pack furniture without instructions. First off, Go-Daigo's restoration plan was about as coherent as a teenager's first attempt at budgeting. His court was a colorful array of samurai, nobles, and monks, each with their own agendas, as diverse as the flavors in a sushi bar. All these factions had backed the emperor's rise to power, and now each expected their slice of the pie. The realpolitik of the situation was harsh. Go-Daigo had to satisfy a multitude of demands while trying to centralize power. It was like trying to herd cats while wearing a blindfold. On the economic side, Japan's coffers were about as empty as a sake bottle after a long night. The country was still reeling from the financial drain of constant warfare, and resources were tighter than a sumo wrestler's belt. Rice, the staple currency of the time, was still soaring in price, and the peasants who toiled in the fields were none too happy. Go-Daigo had to find a way to stabilize the economy, but his policies often came off as naive. Think of someone trying to fix a leaky boat with duct tape. Politically, Go-Daigo's approach was an eclectic mix of old-school imperial decrees and newfangled ideas that often clashed with the samurai class that had been the backbone of his military success. He tried to govern like an emperor from the Heian period, a time when emperors were akin to divine beings. But this was the 14th century, and samurai had become the new power brokers, wielding swords and influence with equal aplomb. Go-Daigo's attempts to sideline these warriors in favor of his own loyalists didn't exactly win him any popularity contests. Enter Ashikaga Takoji, a name that would soon become as synonymous with opportunism as a fox in a henhouse. Takoji, a former ally, was a man with ambitions of his own, a cunning strategist who saw the writing on the wall. He'd been instrumental in helping Go-Daigo topple the Hojo, but his loyalty was about as steadfast as a summer breeze. As Go-Daigo floundered in his political quagmire, Takoji seized his moment, positioning himself as a champion of the disaffected samurai. The betrayal was almost Shakespearean. Takoji's defection wasn't just a strategic maneuver, it was a masterstroke that played into the hands of those disillusioned by Go-Daigo's policies. In 1335, Takoji raised the banner of revolt, setting the stage for a civil war that would further fragment the already fragile political landscape. Think of it as the ultimate et tu, brute moment, where Go-Daigo was Caesar, and Takoji had a penchant for metaphorical knife-wielding. With Takoji leading a formidable faction against him, Go-Daigo's dream of a restored imperial supremacy began to crumble faster than a poorly built sandcastle. His political missteps, coupled with his inability to control the powerful samurai class, left him vulnerable. The Kenmu restoration was turning into a cautionary tale of what happens when idealism meets realpolitik, and it wasn't pretty. By 1336, the situation had escalated into a full-blown conflict known as the Nanbokucho Wars, a period that saw Japan divided into northern and southern courts, each claiming legitimacy. Go-Daigo's southern court was a shadow of its former self, holding on to ideals that were increasingly out of step with the changing times. Meanwhile, Takoji established the Ashikaga Shogunate, a new regime that would rule Japan for more than 2 centuries, proving that even in defeat, ambition could still carve out a legacy. As Go-Daigo retreated to Yoshino, a remote mountain stronghold, one could almost imagine him reflecting on the nature of power and the fickle loyalty of allies. The Kenmu restoration, a noble endeavor in theory, had become a case study in the complexities of governance and the brutal realities of political ambition. Go-Daigo had tasted victory, but his downfall was a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, the crown is often the heaviest burden of all. So, what lessons do we draw from Go-Daigo's brief reign? Perhaps it's the age-old tale of ambition clashing with practicality, or maybe it's a reminder that true power isn't just seized, but maintained through wisdom and adaptability. As we march toward the next chapter, keep in mind that the story of Go-Daigo isn't just a narrative of rise and fall. It's a timeless reflection on the human condition, where dreams and reality often dance a precarious waltz. Stay tuned, because the saga of Go-Daigo's rebellion and the rise of the Ashikaga is far from over. And so, as Go-Daigo found himself nestled in the mountainous terrain of Yoshino, he didn't just sit around sipping tea and lamenting lost glory. Nah, a rebel emperor was plotting his next act, like any self-respecting maverick ready to launch a sequel despite a box office flop. Welcome to the era of the Southern Court, an imperial plan B that was less about defeat and more about defiance with a capital D. Yoshino might not have been the bustling heart of Kyoto, but it was a strategic choice. Nestled in the Kiai mountain range, it offered natural defenses that made it a fortress fit for a ruler in exile. Go-Daigo declared himself the legitimate emperor, and thus the Southern Court was born. It was a bold move, like announcing your own world tour while playing gigs in local taverns. The Northern Court, backed by the Ashikaga Shogunate, wasn't exactly impressed, but Go-Daigo was never one to back down from a challenge. Now, let's talk economy. By this point, Japan's financial state was akin to a samurai without a sword, pretty ineffective. Go-Daigo's Southern Court faced a severe cash flow problem, with resources as scarce as snow in July. Remember, this was a time when rice was currency, and the fields weren't exactly bursting with bumper crops. The country had been through enough wars to leave the economy looking like a patchwork quilt, full of holes and barely holding together. Go-Daigo's attempts to raise funds often led to friction with local lords, who were already stretched thin like a too-small obi around a sumo waist. Taxation was a tricky business, and the emperor had to tread carefully to avoid alienating his supporters. Meanwhile, the Ashikaga Shogunate wasn't sitting idle. They controlled the wealthier, more fertile regions, leaving Go-Daigo with the scraps, kind of like trying to bake a cake with only the crumbs left over. Despite the odds, Go-Daigo pressed on. His stubborn resilience, or just plain stubbornness, depending on your perspective, was legendary. He continued to challenge the Ashikaga's legitimacy, rallying loyalists with promises of restored imperial power. It was a rallying cry that resonated with those disillusioned by the Shogunate's rule, though it's worth noting that romantic notions of imperial glory often overshadowed the harsh realities of everyday life under the Southern Court's jurisdiction. But support was a fickle friend. As years dragged on, many of Go-Daigo's allies began to question the feasibility of his vision. The Southern Court's resources dwindled, and loyalty became a luxury few could afford. By the 1350, the Southern Court was essentially running on fumes, with Go-Daigo's grand ambitions reduced to mere whispers of their former selves. Yet, in true Go-Daigo fashion, he refused to surrender. His determination was like a moth to a flame, unwavering, even if it meant getting burned. The Ashikaga shogunate, on the other hand, was busy consolidating power. Led by Ashikaga Takoji and his successors, they were adept at playing the political game, striking deals with influential daimyo and securing their hold on Japan. Their governance wasn't without its flaws. Internal strife and rebellion were frequent reminders that ruling wasn't as easy as it looked on paper. But compared to the Southern Court's struggles, they were the picture of stability. In many ways, the Southern Court became a symbol of romantic defiance, the underdog story that historians love to wax poetic about. Yet, the reality was far grimmer. Go-Daigo's stubbornness, while admirable, often blinded him to the need for pragmatic alliances and reforms that might have bolstered his cause. The Southern Court was a testament to the power of ideals, but also a cautionary tale about ignoring the practicalities of governance. As the years went by, Go-Daigo's health began to falter. The weight of leadership, coupled with the strain of constant warfare and dwindling support, took its toll. By 1339, when Go-Daigo finally passed away, he left behind a legacy as complex as the man himself. His dream of imperial restoration remained unfulfilled, yet his impact on Japanese history was undeniable. The Nanbokucho period, with its dual courts and constant conflict, set the stage for the eventual unification of Japan under the Ashikaga shogunate. In the end, Go-Daigo's story is one of ambition and resilience, of dreams that soared high yet often crashed hard against the unyielding rocks of reality. His life serves as a reminder that history isn't just about grand narratives and noble ideals, but also about the gritty, stubborn pursuit of those dreams, no matter how elusive they may be. As we prepare to explore the next chapter in this saga, remember that Go-Daigo's legacy is more than just a footnote in Japan's tumultuous history. It's a testament to the enduring power of ambition and the complex dance between vision and reality. So, stick around, because the tale of ambition and power struggles is far from over, and the echoes of Go-Daigo's defiance still resonate through the annals of history. And so, Go-Daigo's legacy echoes down the corridors of history like a rebellious anthem, one that might not have topped the charts but sure left its mark. You see, even as he lay on his deathbed in 1339, the weight of his unfulfilled dreams pressing down on him, Go-Daigo was more than just a failed emperor. He became a symbol, a monument to the relentless pursuit of an ideal, regardless of the odds. Let's dig into this legacy, peeling back the layers of myth and reality like an onion that makes even the toughest samurai shed a tear. First off, let's tackle the legend versus reality conundrum. Go-Daigo is often romanticized as the ultimate underdog, the emperor who dared to challenge the mighty Hojo, and then the Ashikaga, like a lone wolf amidst a pack of hunting dogs. And while there's undeniable appeal in the story of a David taking on multiple Goliaths, the truth is a tad more sobering. Go-Daigo's ambition was as grand as it was impractical, akin to trying to climb Mount Fuji in flip-flops. His vision of a restored imperial authority was admirable, but the execution was fraught with missteps and a stubborn refusal to adapt to the shifting political landscape. Economically, his reign was a financial nightmare. The treasury was emptier than a sake cup at a samurai banquet. The constant warfare drained whatever resources were left, and Go-Daigo's policies did little to alleviate the plight of the common folk. Rice prices continued to soar, and famine was as persistent as a mosquito in summer. These harsh realities often get glossed over when we draw the curtains open on the romance of his tale, but they're crucial in understanding why the Southern Court was more of a whisper than a roar in the grand scheme of Japan's history. Politically, Go-Daigo's approach could be likened to a game of shogi, where he kept insisting the pieces move like chess. The samurai class, with their newfound power, weren't eager to revert to the days when they were mere bodyguards to imperial whims. And while Go-Daigo's insistence on the divine right of emperors played well in the realm of ideals, it was about as effective as a wooden sword in a real fight. His inability to compromise with powerful samurai clans and adapt to the new socio-political dynamics was a key factor in the southern court's eventual decline. Yet despite these setbacks, Go-Daigo's story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a testament to the enduring power of ideals and the human spirit's refusal to bow to reality. His resistance against overwhelming odds, his refusal to accept the status quo, and his relentless pursuit of a dream made him a symbol of defiance that resonated far beyond his time. In a way, Go-Daigo's life was less about the victories and more about the enduring spirit of resistance, the kind that inspires epic poems and grand ballads even when the tangible results fall short. Let's not forget the socio-political ripple effects of his actions. The Nambokucho period, marked by the division between the northern and southern courts, highlighted the challenges of centralized power in a feudal system and set the stage for future unification efforts under the Ashikaga shogunate. The Ashikaga, for all their prowess, learned from Go-Daigo's missteps. They understood the necessity of balancing power between the court and the samurai, a lesson paid for in the blood and toil of the southern court's supporters. And then there's the myth-making, an inevitable byproduct of Go-Daigo's saga. His life and reign have been romanticized over the centuries, his image polished to a shine that often eclipses the grittier truths of his ambitions and failures. Stories of his defiance, his unyielding spirit, and his tragic downfall have been woven into the fabric of Japanese cultural memory, proving that sometimes the tale is mightier than the sword. In the end, Emperor Go-Daigo's legacy is a paradox, a blend of romantic futility and inspirational resistance. While his tangible achievements may have been limited, the ideals he championed and the spirit of his rebellion left a lasting imprint on Japan's historical landscape. His life serves as a reminder that history is not just written by the victors, but also by those who dared to dream against all odds. So, as we close the book on Go-Daigo's chapter, let's ponder the lessons his story imparts. It's a narrative of ambition clashing with practicality, of dreams that soared and stumbled, and of a man who refused to let reality dictate his aspirations. Go-Daigo's life was a testament to the power of the human spirit to persist, even in the face of insurmountable obstacles. And perhaps that's a legacy worth celebrating, both for its triumphs and its trials, in the ever-unfolding tapestry of history. In the bustling, incense-filled corridors of the Forbidden City in 1654, a baby was born who would soon be burdened with the weight of an empire. That baby was Eizenjioro Kshuanai, known to history as Emperor Kangxi. Now, if you've ever seen a baby, you know they aren't exactly built for ruling empires. But Kangxi, born into the Qing dynasty, didn't have much choice in the matter. Blink, and he was 8 years old, staring down the barrel of a job that would make most adults sweat buckets. Welcome to the wild world of child emperors, where the stakes are high, and the sippy cups are made of solid gold. Kangxi's ascension to the throne wasn't just a case of heir today, gone tomorrow. It was a masterclass in political intrigue, with a dash of family drama that would make a soap opera blush. His father, Emperor Shunjai, passed away in 1661, leaving the imperial heart seat vacant. This is where the story gets spicy. Kangxi was plucked from the nursery to wear the dragon robes, but let's be real. An 8-year-old couldn't exactly run an empire that spanned millions of square kilometers and housed a population of over 100 million people. Enter Grand Empress Dowager Ziyao, Kangxi's grandmother, and the true power behind the throne. Ziyao was no stranger to the cutthroat world of king court politics. She was the one pulling the strings, ensuring that her grandson didn't end up as just another footnote in the annals of Chinese history. Her political acumen was sharper than a Manchu warrior's blade, and she had no qualms about using it. She deftly navigated the murky waters of court life, filled with power-hungry regents and ambitious courtiers, all while making sure Kangxi didn't choke on his rice. During the Regency period, the King Court was a bit like a reality TV show, but with more silk robes and fewer confessionals. The regents appointed to guide young Kangxi were not exactly a dream team. Among them was Arboy, whose ambition was as big as his ego. Arboy fancied himself as the puppet master, but Xiaozhuang was 2 steps ahead, ready to cut the strings if necessary. She taught Kangxi to stand his ground, like any good grandma would, by helping him wield the most powerful weapon in a child's arsenal, the ability to surprise the adults when they least expect it. Kangxi was no ordinary child. While most kids his age were figuring out hopscotch, he was mastering the art of war and statesmanship, and perhaps the most entertaining part of his early reign was watching the seasoned statesmen of the king court navigate the whims of a kid who could, quite literally, have them executed. Imagine a group of stern-faced ministers bowing deeply, only to be met with a gap-toothed grin and an impromptu request for a game of hide and seek. It's not the normal way to run an empire, but it certainly kept things interesting. The young emperor's education was intense, and unlike any kid's typical homework, Kangxi was schooled in Confucian classics, military strategy, and governance. He could recite the 4 books and 5 classics before most kids could tie their shoes. This wasn't just to make him a well-rounded individual. Xiaozhuang and her advisors knew that knowledge was power, and they were intent on making Kangxi the sharpest tool in the imperial shed. In a world where a misstep could mean the difference between ruling and being ruled, a well-educated emperor was the dynasty's best defense. As Kangxi grew, so did his confidence and skill in handling the intricacies of court politics. He began to assert himself more, showing that he was more than just a figurehead. By the time he was 14, Kangxi had had enough of the regent's meddling. He orchestrated a coup to oust Arboy, a move that was as bold as it was risky. This wasn't a game of chess, it was real life. In the high-stakes world of imperial politics, the consequences of failure were dire. But Kangxi pulled it off, sending a clear message that he was ready to take the reins. Kangxi's early reign was a testament to the fact that even in the most structured and hierarchical societies, youth and ingenuity could break through the crust of tradition. As he navigated the treacherous waters of the king court, he demonstrated a level of wisdom and strategic thinking that belied his age. His story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely figures can wield the greatest power, not in spite of their age, but because of it. After all, there's nothing quite like a fresh perspective to shake up the status quo. So, just when you think young Kangxi can take a breather after his audacious coup against Arboy, the universe decides to throw him another curveball, this time in the form of a rebellion that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones fan clutch their pearls. Enter the revolt of the 3 feudatories, a name that sounds like a folk band, but was more like a political nightmare with a side of military chaos. Picture this. Kangxi, barely out of his teens, now had to juggle imperial governance while the southern provinces of China were on the brink of anarchy, thanks to some seriously disgruntled former Ming loyalists who weren't thrilled about their new Manchu overlords. Now, let's unpack this historical suitcase. The 3 feudatories were essentially 3 powerful Han Chinese generals who had been given control over vast territories in the south as a reward for their loyalty during the Qing conquest. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, not quite. These guys, Wu Sangui, Zheng Jingzhang, and Shang Jixin, weren't exactly the poster children for gratitude. Instead of sending thank you notes, they decided it was time to break free from King oversight. Wu Sangui, the unofficial leader of this rebellious trio, had a flair for drama. He was a former Ming general who had famously opened the gates of the Great Wall, letting the Manchus in. Fast forward a couple of decades, and he was now leading an uprising against them. Talk about biding the hand that feeds you, or in this case, the empire that lets you keep your head. Handling this rebellion was more than just a military task. It was an economic quagmire. The costs were astronomical. Think millions of silver taels, which, for context, could buy you more than a few palaces or a lifetime supply of silk pajamas. The war drained the imperial treasury, forcing the Qing administration to raise taxes, much to the delight of absolutely no one. Yet, Kangxi wasn't just throwing money at the problem. He was a strategic thinker, employing a mix of brute force and diplomacy. He understood that winning over hearts and minds was just as crucial as winning battles. So, while he was sending his troops south to engage in the bloody business of war, he was also working the political angles, offering amnesty and incentives to those willing to switch sides. a classic carrot-and-stick approach, though in this case, the carrot was sometimes literal, given how dire the supply situation could get. Kangxi's military strategy was methodical. He knew that the key to crushing the revolt lay in isolating the rebels and cutting off their support. So, he set about fortifying the loyal provinces and slowly squeezing the rebellious regions into submission. It was like a game of chess, but instead of pawns, you had entire armies, and instead of a king, you had an emperor who was as charming as he was cunning. And here's where Kangxi's personal charm came into play. He didn't just rely on his generals to do the talking. He was often the face of diplomacy. His ability to negotiate and communicate effectively with his opponents often turned the tide of battles before they even began. It's said that his charisma could disarm even the most hardened of soldiers, making him a formidable force both on and off the battlefield. But let's not sugarcoat it. The war wasn't all smooth sailing. It lasted 8 grueling years, from 1673 to 1681, involving numerous bloody skirmishes and devastating sieges. The rebellion spread across vast territories, making it one of the most widespread uprisings in Qing history. Cities like Kunming and Chengdu became battlegrounds, with civilian casualties mounting as the conflict dragged on. The human cost was immense, a sobering reminder that behind every glorious victory are countless untold tragedies. Yet, despite these hardships, Kangxi remained resolute, his determination as unyielding as the Great Wall itself. Although he was young, Kangxi's political savvy was evident in how he handled the aftermath of the revolt. He understood that a victory in battle was only the first step. The real challenge was in rebuilding and unifying the fractured regions. He embarked on a campaign to restore confidence in the Qing administration, reducing taxes in the war-torn areas and investing in infrastructure to stimulate economic recovery. This wasn't just an act of goodwill. It was a calculated move to ensure long-term stability. The roads that were built and the cities that were rebuilt became symbols of a new era of prosperity under Kangxi's rule. In the end, the suppression of the 3 feudatories' revolt was more than just a military victory. It was a testament to Kangxi's ability to balance the scales of power with remarkable deftness. He emerged not just as a ruler who had quelled a massive rebellion, but as an emperor who had redefined what it meant to wield power in the Qing dynasty. He had navigated the treacherous waters of empire building with a finesse that belied his years, laying the groundwork for a dynasty that would endure for centuries. And so, as the dust settled and the empire began to heal, Kangxi stood tall, a young emperor no longer, but a seasoned leader ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. With the rebellion behind him and the empire's map looking more unified than a family Christmas card, Kangxi set his sights on shoring up his power and knitting together the sprawling patchwork quilt that was the Qing Empire. But how do you keep a realm of 5 million square miles and over 100 million people from breaking apart like a soggy dumpling? Well, Kangxi's plan was a cocktail of Confucian ideals, scientific progress, and a healthy dose of good old-fashioned imperial charm. But first, a little house cleaning was in order. Kangxi knew that the key to a stable empire was winning hearts and minds, not just those of the mandarins in the court, but also of the common folk in the rice paddies. So, he doubled down on promoting Confucianism, which was basically the political equivalent of chicken soup for the Chinese soul. Confucianism was all about harmony, hierarchy, and knowing your place, which, if you're an emperor, sounds like a great deal. Kangxi sponsored the compilation of the Kangxi Dictionary, which was the Qing dynasty's version of a Wikipedia project, cataloging 47,035 characters. This wasn't just a nerdy endeavor. It was a cultural unifier, a way to cement a shared identity in an empire so vast it could make even the Roman Empire look like a neighborhood bake sale. But Kangxi wasn't just about dusty old books and rituals. He had a keen eye for the future, too. He welcomed Jesuit missionaries to his court, folks who brought along shiny new toys like telescopes and maps. Now, we're not talking about a casual interest in stargazing here. Kangxi was serious about science. He established the Imperial Astronomical Observatory and personally learned from the Jesuits to predict eclipses with a precision that would put modern meteorologists to shame. Imagine the emperor himself, peering through a telescope, while some court official nervously holds a parasol to shield him from the sun. It's a scene worthy of a comedy sketch, yet it was Kangxi's way of integrating Western knowledge with traditional Chinese wisdom. And then there were the famous tours, Kangxi's version of a royal roadshow. Instead of sitting in the Forbidden City's gilded cage, he preferred to hit the road, often traveling incognito to get a real sense of his empire. These tours were part political theater, part intelligence-gathering mission, and part leisurely stroll, if you can call a journey with a caravan of thousands leisurely. Kangxi famously donned disguises, which might sound like something out of a Shakespearean comedy, but it was serious business. He wanted to see his subjects as they were, not as they pretended to be when an imperial retinue rolled into town. Of course, the logistics of these grand tours were a nightmare that would make a modern wedding planner break into a cold sweat. Moving an emperor and his entourage across China was no small feat. We're talking about thousands of horses, carts filled to the brim with supplies, and makeshift camps that could rival small cities. The imperial baggage train was a sight to behold, carrying everything from scrolls to tea sets, because even an emperor likes his comforts on the road. And let's not forget the array of costumes Kangxi would have needed for his disguises, enough to fill a wardrobe department for a Broadway musical. In these travels, Kangxi's sense of humor shone through. There's a story, likely embellished, but too good not to share, about how he once staged a mock argument with a local official to gauge the honesty of his advisors. Imagine being an unsuspecting local, watching your emperor bicker like a schoolboy over a game of marbles. These antics weren't just for laughs. They were a strategic way to cut through the layers of sycophancy and understand what was really going on in his empire. But Kangxi's tours weren't all fun and games. They were crucial for understanding the diverse cultures and needs of his subjects. In visiting the southern provinces, he could see firsthand the economic challenges they faced, from floods to famines, and address them directly. He implemented policies that would stimulate trade, improve irrigation systems, and bolster defenses against natural disasters. It's easy to romanticize these journeys as leisurely jaunts, but they were hard work that paid off in the form of a more cohesive, stable empire. Now, as much as Kangxi loved to hit the road, these journeys weren't exactly spontaneous. They were carefully choreographed affairs, with routes planned months in advance and security measures tighter than a drum. Yet, despite the formality, Kangxi's ability to adapt and respond to the challenges he encountered was nothing short of remarkable. He had a knack for turning potential disasters into opportunities, whether it was pacifying disgruntled officials or smoothing over local tensions. His charisma wasn't just a tool for diplomacy. It was a genuine connection with his people, a bridge that spanned the vast distances of his empire. Kangxi's consolidation of power wasn't just about military might or political maneuvering. It was about creating a lasting legacy of unity and progress. He envisioned an empire that was not just vast in size, but rich in knowledge and culture. His promotion of Confucian ideals provided a moral and ethical framework that, while hierarchical, offered stability and continuity. His embrace of scientific advancements positioned China at the forefront of global knowledge exchange, a testament to his forward-thinking leadership. As our story unfolds, Kangxi continues to weave the intricate tapestry of his reign, a blend of tradition and innovation, authority and empathy. His ability to navigate the complexities of empire building with both humor and gravity stands as a testament to his unique brand of leadership. But hold on, because Kangxi's legacy is far from complete. There's more to explore, more to understand, and more to marvel at as we continue our journey through the life and reign of one of China's greatest emperors. Stay tuned, because the story of Kangxi is just getting started, and there's no telling what twists and turns await in the chapters to come. So, as Kangxi's empire blossomed under his watchful eye, he turned his gaze toward a new frontier, the West. And no, I don't mean he packed his bags for a trip to California. This was the 17th century, after all, and the Wild West was still a twinkle in the New World's eye. Instead, Kangxi was interested in the Western powers that were beginning to knock on China's door. Imagine a diplomatic dance where the participants were as curious about each other's cultures as they were wary of each other's intentions. A bit like a high-stakes game of poker, but with telescopes and Jesuit robes instead of aces and spades. Enter the Jesuit missionaries, with their keen interest in spreading the good word, and perhaps just as importantly, their knack for science and mathematics. These weren't your typical robe-wearing evangelists. They were intellectual heavyweights, armed with the latest astronomical and geographical knowledge from Europe. Imagine Galileo in a cassock, but in the court of the Forbidden City instead of Renaissance Italy. These Jesuits saw China not just as a spiritual harvest field, but as a fertile ground for the exchange of knowledge. Kangxi, ever the savvy leader, saw an opportunity. Here was a chance to bring something novel into the imperial fold, a fresh perspective that could enrich the king court's already formidable intellectual arsenal. Kangxi's relationship with the Jesuits is one of those historical curiosities that remind us of human nature's complexity. Here was an emperor of a dynasty known for its staunch traditionalism, yet he was exchanging ideas with foreigners who might have been burned at the stake back in Europe for their scientific views. The Jesuits, like Matteo Ricci and Ferdinand Verbiest, became regulars at the king court, sharing insights that ranged from astronomy to cartography. Kangxi, who had a mathematician's brain hidden under his imperial crown, devoured these lessons with the appetite of a scholar. You could say he was the original Renaissance man of China, a polymath before it was cool. And let's not forget the irony here. An emperor from a lineage that prized Confucian orthodoxy was now eagerly learning how to predict solar eclipses using Western methods, an endeavor that, let's face it, probably looked like sorcery to the more conservative elements of his court. But Kangxi wasn't just playing with telescopes for fun. He understood the power of knowledge. Accurate astronomical predictions could help with everything from agriculture to maintaining the calendar, and a correct calendar was crucial for imperial legitimacy. If you could predict the heavens, you could earn the respect of both your people and your court. In short, Kangxi was playing 4D chess while his contemporaries were still figuring out checkers. The Jesuits also brought with them Western technology, which was like catnip to Kangxi's curious mind. From clocks to cannons, the king court began to see a fusion of Eastern artistry and Western innovation. Imagine the grandeur of the Forbidden City dotted with the latest in European engineering. It must have been quite the sight, a blend of silk and steel, of tradition and modernity. But this wasn't just about novelty, it was about power. Kangxi knew that technology was a tool to cement king dominance, both internally and against external threats. A cannon might not be as poetic as a Confucian aphorism, but it certainly made for a convincing argument in territorial disputes. Despite the benefits, Kangxi had to tread carefully. The king court was a place where innovation had to be balanced with tradition, where the introduction of foreign technology could be seen as both a boon and a threat. It was like walking a tightrope with the eyes of the entire empire watching. Kangxi managed this balancing act with aplomb, ensuring that while the Jesuits were welcome, they were never in control. Their presence was a testament to his openness to new ideas, yet his insistence on maintaining the core values of his empire was a masterclass in political savvy. Diplomatically speaking, Kangxi's engagement with the West was more nuanced than simply welcoming missionaries. He was playing a strategic game on a global chessboard. European powers were eager to establish trade and political ties with China, seeing it as a land of untapped potential and endless riches. It was a bit like the modern tech rush, but instead of apps and startups, the commodities were tea, silk, and porcelain. Kangxi, for his part, was keenly aware of the benefits and dangers of such interactions. He knew that opening the doors too wide could invite not just trade, but potential colonization. So, he kept a firm grip on how much access foreign powers had, allowing them a taste of China's wealth without giving away the store. This diplomatic balancing act extended beyond Europe to Russia, China's northern neighbor. The Treaty of Nerchinsk in 1689 was a landmark moment, marking one of the first equal treaties between China and a European power. It was more than just a demarcation of borders. It was a testament to Kangxi's ability to negotiate from a position of strength and respect. It was an emperor who could wield both the carrot and the stick, who understood that diplomacy was as much about perception as it was about reality. Kangxi's later years were characterized by this blend of traditionalism and innovation, by a willingness to embrace the new while safeguarding the old. He was a ruler who understood that the strength of an empire lay not just in its military or its wealth, but in its ability to adapt and evolve. This wasn't just about maintaining power. It was about creating a legacy that would stand the test of time. And as we delve deeper into Kangxi's reign, we see an emperor who was as complex as the empire he governed, a leader whose vision shaped not just his own time, but the future of China itself. But hold on, because Kangxi's story isn't over yet. His reign is a testament to the power of a curious mind and a steady hand, to the impact of a ruler who could see beyond the horizon. So, buckle up, because the road ahead is filled with intrigue, with challenges and triumphs, with the kind of stories that show us why history is far more fascinating than fiction. Stay tuned, for the tale of Emperor Kangxi is one that continues to surprise, to inspire, and to remind us that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. As Kangxi's story unfolds, we find ourselves on the cusp of his legacy, a legacy as sprawling and complex as the empire he governed. Now, you might think that after ruling for a staggering 61 years, Kangxi would leave behind a neatly tied package, a dynasty without wrinkles. But history, like a rebellious teenager, rarely behaves as expected. Instead, Kangxi's reign concluded with a succession crisis that would make a Shakespearean tragedy look like a sitcom. Picture this: a long-reigning emperor, beloved yet surrounded by the murky fog of court intrigue. Kangxi had a whopping 35 sons, enough to form a soccer team with substitutes to spare. But instead of a friendly match, what ensued was more akin to a cutthroat Game of Thrones. Unlike the streamlined imperial successions of fairy tales, Kangxi's potential successors were embroiled in a web of jealousy, betrayal, and ambition. These guys could give the Lannisters a run for their money. Kangxi's favorite son, Yinreng, was initially groomed to be the heir apparent. The emperor even had him installed as crown prince, a move that, in theory, should have calmed the waters. But Yinreng had a penchant for scandal, rumored to indulge in everything from debauchery to downright insubordination. In an era where filial piety was as sacred as the emperor's word, Yinreng's antics were about as welcome as a bull in a china shop. Kangxi, a father as well as an emperor, wrestled with the decision to depose him not once, but twice. That's right, Yinreng was the crown prince version of a boomerang. He just kept coming back. But let's not get too carried away with the myth of the perfect patriarch. Kangxi's decision-making process was fraught with political calculations and personal dilemmas. Balancing familial affection with the harsh realities of governance is no easy feat, and Kangxi's struggle underscores the human element in history's grand narrative. Despite his political prowess, he was unable to prevent the internal strife that would haunt his final years. The once harmonious court began to resemble a reality TV show, with plots twisting faster than you can say imperial succession. And then there was the economic impact of Kangxi's policies, which, while often overshadowed by the drama of his court, were pivotal in shaping the Qing dynasty's future. Under his reign, the empire's coffers were bolstered by a well-oiled taxation system that was a marvel of administrative efficiency. The land tax reforms and the introduction of the single whip law streamlined revenue collection, ensuring that silver flowed more smoothly into the treasury than the Yangtze in flood season. Yet, even these successes came with their own set of challenges. The burden of taxation didn't always distribute evenly, often sparking grumblings of discontent among the lower classes. Kangxi's economic policies were a double-edged sword, providing stability but also sowing seeds of future unrest. Culturally, Kangxi's reign was a renaissance of sorts for the Qing dynasty. He championed the arts, sponsoring works that would become masterpieces of Chinese literature and painting. The Kangxi Dictionary, for instance, was not just about cataloging characters. It was an endeavor to preserve culture in a rapidly changing world. Yet, it's crucial to balance the romanticized view of this cultural blossoming with the less glamorous reality of a court rife with censorship and control. Kangxi understood that art was power, and he wielded it to craft a narrative that suited his vision of the empire. But let's not be fooled by the romantic haze of historical legend. Kangxi's court was no idyllic garden party. The corridors of power were teeming with whispers and shadowy deals, a reality as gritty as the streets of 17th century Beijing. The emperor was a master of diplomacy, and his ability to juggle the competing interests of his court was nothing short of an acrobat's feat. Yet, beneath the surface, the ever-present threat of rebellion and dissent simmered. a testament to the precarious nature of absolute power. So, what are we to make of Kangxi's legacy? His reign was a complex tapestry, woven from strands of triumph and turmoil, progress and peril. His ability to balance the demands of empire with the nuances of court life is a reminder that leadership is less about perfection and more about navigating the messiness of reality. The succession crisis he left behind was a stark reminder that even the most powerful ruler could not control the future. His son's power struggles would eventually culminate in the enthronement of Yangzheng, a ruler as effective as he was enigmatic. Yet, the scars of their father's indecisiveness would leave a lasting mark on the dynasty. Kangxi's legacy is a fascinating blend of myth and reality, a story that endures because it speaks to the eternal complexities of human nature. His reign reminds us that history's greatest figures are not defined by their infallibility, but by their humanity. Kangxi's story, with all its twists and turns, serves as a powerful narrative of ambition, resilience, and the unending quest for balance. His 61-year reign stands as a testament to the enduring power of a leader who dared to dream big, even as he grappled with the challenges of his time. As we close the chapter on Kangxi, we find that his legacy is not merely a relic of the past, but a living testament to the intricate dance of power, culture, and history. His reign may have ended, but the echoes of his leadership continue to resonate, reminding us that the stories of the past are never truly finished. They are instead ever-evolving dialogues between what was and what could be, inviting us to explore, question, and learn from the tapestry of history that Kangxi helped weave. So, as you drift off into a slumber filled with visions of dragon robes and imperial edicts, remember that Kangxi's story, much like history itself, is a tale of endless possibilities. The Byzantine Senate, a political entity that smacks of nostalgia as much as it does of calculated political theater, makes its grand entrance on the historical stage as a curious relic of the past. It's like the vintage vinyl you keep around to impress your friends but never actually play. Established under Constantine the Great around 330 AD, this was less about wielding power and more about keeping up appearances, kind of ancient political cosplay, if you will. Let's rewind a bit, back to the grandeur of the Roman Senate, a place that was the epicenter of political life in the Roman Republic. Composed of 300 to 600 members, depending on the time period, it was the powerhouse of governance, dictating policies, waging wars, and generally running the show. Fast forward to the waning days of Rome, and the Senate is more like an aging rock band, still on stage, but the audience is more interested in the latest emperor's antics. When Constantine decided to move the capital from Rome to Byzantium, soon to be renamed Constantinople, it was a clever move, strategically and politically. But what's an emperor without a Senate? Cue the establishment of the Byzantine Senate, a nod to tradition drenched in political savvy. Now, Constantine wasn't just relocating the empire's capital. He was also setting the stage for a new empire, one that would eventually outlast its Western counterpart by 1,000 years. The Senate of Constantinople was the emperor's way of saying, "Look, we're still the Romans you know and love, just with a fresher coat of paint." Sure, the marble halls and senatorial togas were more for show than substance, but appearances mattered. It's like putting a shiny new spoiler on a car that barely runs. It looks fast, even if it's not. The Senate of Constantinople was designed to echo its Roman predecessor, but with a significant twist. Instead of being a body of decision-makers, it was more of a prestigious social club. Senators were handpicked by the emperor, not elected, and their main job was to nod along and occasionally voice approval of the emperor's decisions. It was like being part of an exclusive VIP section where the only requirement was to agree with the DJ's playlist. And oh, how the emperors delighted in this arrangement. It gave them the veneer of traditional governance while consolidating power firmly within the imperial grasp. The Senate was a tool of legitimacy, a way to reassure the populace that, despite the changes, the empire was still the same at heart. In this setup, Senate of Constantinople had all the pomp and circumstance of its Roman ancestor, but none of the muscle. A bit like a lion with its teeth filed down, impressive to look at, but not much of a threat. To understand this better, consider the composition of this body. Senators were often wealthy landowners, former military officials, or relatives of the emperor. Their status was more about wealth and birthright than any political acumen. The Senate was a who's who of the Byzantine elite, a gathering of the influential who had more to gain from aligning with the emperor than opposing him. This was ancient politics with a modern twist, power with a side of pageantry. Yet the Senate's existence wasn't entirely useless. It served as a training ground for future leaders, a proving ground where young aristocrats could cut their teeth on politics without threatening the emperor's power. It was a place where debates were more about practicing rhetoric than enacting policy, like a model UN for adults. This is where the Byzantine emperor's cunning shone through. They maintained the illusion of a balanced political system while keeping the real reins of power firmly in their grip. The Byzantine Senate's role in empire building was crucial, albeit not in the way you might imagine. It was more about optics than outcomes, a delicate dance of power and public relations. The emperors knew that the semblance of tradition could be just as powerful as tradition itself, and they wielded this knowledge like a maestro conducting an orchestra. The Senate was a symbol, a reminder of Rome's enduring legacy, and a clever bit of PR that kept the wheels of the Byzantine Empire turning smoothly. So there it was, the Byzantine Senate, a political nod to the past, a strategic tool for the present, and a masterclass in the art of ancient political theater. It was a testament to the emperor's genius for maintaining control while giving the appearance of shared governance. A Senate that was less about policy and more about pageantry, a historical echo that resonated through the halls of Constantinople, echoing the glory of a bygone era while serving the needs of a new one. And so, it stood, a relic of nostalgia wrapped in the trappings of power, forever a part of the Byzantine narrative, as much a part of its identity as the city's storied walls themselves. As the Byzantine Senate stood there, a relic of nostalgia wrapped in the trappings of power, it quickly found its groove as the empire's premier social club. Imagine it as the ancient world's version of an elite country club, but with more togas and fewer golf carts. This was the place where the politically ambitious could exchange their swords for senatorial seats, a cushy gig with perks that would make any modern lobbyist envious. Let's talk about those perks, shall we? Being a Byzantine senator was like hitting the jackpot without even buying a ticket. For starters, there were the tax breaks. Yes, tax breaks. Senators enjoyed significant financial privileges, including exemptions from some of the more onerous taxes that burdened lesser mortals. It's like being part of an exclusive club where the membership fee is waived and the drinks are on the house. Who wouldn't want in on that action? But wait, there's more. Senators also received a handsome salary, which, during the early centuries of the Byzantine Empire, could amount to several pounds of gold per year. Adjusting for inflation, that's a pretty sweet deal, enough to keep any senator living in the lap of luxury. Add to this the prestige and influence that came with the title, and it's no wonder the empire's elite were drawn to the Senate like moths to a flame. Now, you might be thinking, with all these benefits, the Senate must have wielded some serious power, right? Well, not exactly. In practice, the Senate had about as much legislative clout as a student council, lots of meetings, but very little impact. It served mainly as a sounding board for the emperor's policies, a ceremonial body that nodded along to whatever tune the emperor was playing. Think of it as a fancy advisory committee with zero teeth. The real power, of course, remained firmly in the emperor's grasp. In essence, the Senate was a stage for the political theater of the day, where the elite could strut their stuff without making any real decisions. It was a comfortable retirement home for those who had climbed the greasy pole of Byzantine politics and wanted to enjoy the view from the top. For many, it was the ultimate status symbol, a testament to their success, and a platform from which they could continue to wield influence behind the scenes. You see, in the Byzantine Empire, appearances mattered as much as, if not more than, reality. The Senate's grandeur and prestige masked its impotence, providing a convincing illusion of continuity and tradition. The senators themselves were the empire's social A-listers, a who's who of the Byzantine aristocracy. They were the people who mattered, the ones who could pull strings and make things happen, even if they weren't officially in charge. But let's not get too carried away by the romantic allure of senatorial life. Beneath the gilded veneer lay a harsh reality. The Senate's lack of real power meant that it was often little more than a rubber stamp institution, a place where the politically ambitious could bide their time and enjoy the perks without getting their hands dirty. It was a classic case of style over substance, a reminder that in politics, as in life, things are not always what they seem. Despite its limitations, the Senate played an important role in the Byzantine Empire's political ecosystem. It provided a safe space for the elite to engage in political maneuvering without threatening the emperor's authority. It was a place where future leaders could hone their skills, a proving ground where the talented could rise through the ranks and the well-connected could secure their legacies. In many ways, the Senate was a microcosm of the Byzantine Empire itself, rich, complex, and driven by the interplay of power and prestige. It was a reminder that while emperors came and went, the machinery of state continued to turn, powered by the ambition and aspirations of those who inhabited its corridors. As the Byzantine Empire evolved, so too did the Senate. Over the centuries, it adapted to the shifting sands of political change, reinventing itself as required to stay relevant in a rapidly changing world. Yet, even as its role evolved, the Senate remained true to its roots, a symbol of continuity in a world marked by upheaval. So, there you have it, an empire's Senate that was less about governance and more about glamour, a testament to the enduring power of tradition and the allure of political prestige. As we continue the Byzantine narrative, we'll see how this Senate, with all its quirks and charms, continued to play its part in the grand drama of empire building. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this fascinating world of ancient political theater. The Byzantine Senate, bringing glamour to governance since the 4th century. But what happens when the empire's social club finds itself in the eye of a storm? Enter the Nika riots of 532 AD, a moment that saw the Senate put its proverbial money where its mouth was, or tried to anyway. Let's set the scene. Constantinople, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, was about to get a little too hot under the toga. Picture a city teetering on the brink of chaos. The Nika riots weren't just your garden variety street protests. They were a full-blown explosion of public fury, sparked by a deadly cocktail of political dissatisfaction, sports fanaticism, and a hefty dose of social unrest. Think Game of Thrones meets Gladiator, but with more shouting and less CGI. The riots kicked off in the Hippodrome, the ancient world's answer to a football stadium, where rival factions, the Blues and the Greens, were more concerned with chariot races than empire building. But this wasn't just about sports. These factions had political teeth, and they were gnashing them at Emperor Justinian I, who was barely clinging onto the reins of power. It was a bad week for Justinian, and by bad, I mean the city was literally set ablaze. Now, you'd think the Senate would leap into action here, right? The city in flames, people rioting in the streets, and the emperor's throne wobbling like a three-legged chair. If ever there was a time for the Senate to flex some political muscle, this was it. But alas, the reality was more complex. The Senate, for all its pomp, was more like a deer caught in headlights, uncertain of its role and paralyzed by indecision. Here's the thing. The Senate had been so used to being a rubber stamp institution that when real crisis hit, it was like asking a Hollywood actor to do their own stunts. Sure, they looked the part, but when it came to action, they were suddenly nowhere to be found. The Senate did attempt to play mediator, trying to cool tensions and calm the mob. But with the city in flames and the emperor's authority under siege, their efforts were about as effective as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. As the riots reached a fever pitch, the Senate found itself in a precarious position. On one hand, they were supposed to be the voice of reason and stability, a bridge between the emperor and the people. On the other, many senators had vested interests that aligned more with their personal fortunes than with Justinian's survival. It's almost like they were trying to save the empire while ensuring they still had a comfortable seat at the table, talk about having your cake and eating it too. In the end, it was Justinian's wife, the formidable Empress Theodora, who delivered the ultimate reality check. She famously stated, "Royal purple makes a fine burial shroud," which is a classy way of saying, "I'd rather die a ruler than live a fugitive." With her steely resolve, she persuaded Justinian to stand his ground, and with the help of his generals, he crushed the riots with force, leaving tens of thousands dead. Apparently, diplomacy wasn't on the menu that day. So what about the Senate? Well, they were left to pick up the pieces and reflect on their role, or lack thereof, in the entire debacle. Their attempt at mediation had been overshadowed by the emperor's decisive action, and their moral authority, which had always been more of a rumor than a reality, was called into question. When push came to shove, the Senate had shown itself to be more of a bystander than a significant player. But let's not be too harsh. The Senate's failure to act decisively during the Nika riots was symptomatic of a larger issue: the Byzantine political system itself, which was structured to concentrate power in the hands of the emperor while giving the illusion of shared governance. The Senate's impotence wasn't just a failure of nerve. It was a design feature of the Byzantine state. Think of the Senate as a gilded cage, beautiful to look at, with comfortable perches, but ultimately a place where the real action was decided by someone else. The senators were like actors in a play where the script was already written, and they were merely delivering lines that someone else had penned. The Nika riots exposed the Senate's limitations and highlighted the emperor's absolute authority. But it also underscored the Senate's role as a political safety valve, a place where tensions could be aired, if not resolved. While the Senate's influence was often more smoke than fire, it remained an essential part of the Byzantine political landscape, a reminder of Rome's shadow and a testament to the emperor's ability to keep power firmly in their grasp. Throughout Byzantine history, the Senate walked a tightrope. It was a place of prestige and privilege, where senators could bask in the glow of imperial favor while keeping one eye on their own interests. It was a delicate balancing act, a dance where the steps were dictated by the emperor, and the Senate had to follow without missing a beat. The Nika riots were a stark reminder that in the Byzantine Empire, power was a game played at the highest level, with the stakes as high as the walls of Constantinople itself. The Senate might have been a part of that game, but it was the emperor who held the winning hand. As history marched on, the Senate would continue to play its part, sometimes as a mediator, occasionally as a power player, but always as a symbol of the empire's enduring legacy. So, as we pause in our Byzantine narrative, remember this: the Senate was a beautiful illusion, a testament to the power of tradition in a world ruled by emperors. It was a place of privilege, a stage for political theater, and a reminder that in the Byzantine Empire, appearances were everything. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complexities of this fascinating empire, where the past and present danced in a delicate waltz of power and prestige. As the Byzantine Empire continued its intricate dance of power and tradition, the Senate found itself increasingly sidelined, like a one-strendy band relegated to playing county fairs. The centuries rolled on, and the senators, once the glitterati of Constantinople, became more like ceremonial relics than political heavyweights. Let's dive into this gradual decline, where internal corruption and external threats conspired to turn the Senate from a symbol of prestige into little more than historical wallpaper. Now, let's be real. Corruption in the Byzantine Senate was about as surprising as finding sand in the Sahara. Wealth and power were the currency of the day, and senators often found themselves caught in the tangled web of greed and self-interest. It was a classic case of follow the money, as senators prioritized their own fortunes over the empire's well-being. Picture a room full of politicians with one hand on their hearts and the other firmly in the cookie jar. The Byzantine Empire, like a ship caught in a storm with a captain more interested in counting coins than steering, faced numerous external threats. From the Seljuk Turks in the east to the Normans in the west, the empire was under constant pressure. During the reign of Alexios I Komnenos in the late 11th century, these threats reached a fever pitch, and the emperor had to act fast. Alexios wasn't about to let the Senate's dithering hold him back. Instead, he turned to more loyal bureaucratic structures, effectively giving the Senate the cold shoulder. Alexios was a man with a plan, and that plan didn't involve waiting around for the Senate to get its act together. In 1081, as the Normans advanced on Byzantine territory, he realized he needed a streamlined decision-making process, something the Senate, with its penchant for pomp and indecision, simply couldn't provide. So, Alexios began to bypass the Senate, relying instead on a core group of trusted advisors and military commanders. Think of it as trading in a bloated, sluggish committee for a sleek, efficient SWAT team. This shift didn't happen overnight, but it was a clear sign that the Senate's star was fading. As Alexios reformed the military and administrative apparatus, Senators found themselves with less influence, their voices drowned out by the clamor of more dynamic power brokers. The Senate became a place where old men with fading laurels sat in echoing halls, reminiscing about the glory days while the real action happened elsewhere. The reforms implemented by Alexios and his successors highlighted an uncomfortable truth. The Byzantine Senate was increasingly irrelevant. It was a body caught in the amber of tradition, while the empire around it evolved to meet new challenges. The senators, with their fine robes and grand titles, were like actors in a silent movie trying to compete with the talkies. They looked the part, but no one could hear them over the din of change. Economic realities also played a role in the Senate's decline. As the empire faced financial woes, the lavish lifestyle that once defined a senator's existence became harder to sustain. Tax exemptions and hefty salaries were harder to justify when the empire's coffers were running low. Just as the senators' influence waned, so too did their ability to live in the lap of luxury. It was a classic case of the party's over, as the Senate watched its privileges dwindle like the remains of a once sumptuous feast. Let's not forget the role of power struggles in this decline. The Byzantine Empire was no stranger to political intrigue, and senators often found themselves as pawns in the high-stakes chess game of imperial politics. Rival factions within the court used senators as bargaining chips, promising influence in exchange for loyalty. But as the emperors streamlined their administrations, the Senate's bargaining power diminished, leaving them more like rooks than queens on the political chessboard. In this new landscape, the Senate's irrelevance became glaringly apparent. It was a relic, a nod to an era when tradition held sway over pragmatism. The Senate still served a purpose, but it was more about maintaining appearances than shaping policy. It was the empire's way of saying, "Hey, look, we're still holding onto the past," while the future barreled ahead like a runaway chariot. So, here's the kicker. The Byzantine Senate's decline wasn't just a tale of political misfortune. It was a reflection of broader changes within the empire, a shift from the grandeur of Rome to the realities of an empire besieged by internal and external forces. The Senate's fall from grace was as much about the changing tides of history as it was about the failings of the senators themselves. As we wrap up this chapter of the Byzantine Senate saga, remember that its decline was a slow burn, a gradual erosion of power and prestige. Yet, even as its influence waned, the Senate remained a fixture in the Byzantine narrative, a symbol of a bygone era clinging to relevance in a world that had moved on. The Senate's story, much like the empire it served, is one of resilience, tradition, and the enduring dance between past and present. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of the Byzantine Empire, where the old and the new collided in a fascinating waltz of history. And so, as the Byzantine Empire barreled toward its eventual rendezvous with disaster, the Senate found itself drifting along like a forgotten relic on a rapidly changing sea. By the late 12th century, the Senate was less a bastion of political power and more of an ancient artifact collecting dust in the grand halls of Constantinople. Imagine a once glorious ship now reduced to a ghostly outline on the horizon, its sails tattered by the winds of change. Fast forward to 1204, a year that would forever etch itself into the annals of Byzantine history like a bad tattoo. The Fourth Crusade, initially intended as a holy mission to reclaim Jerusalem, took a sharp detour, ending up at the gates of Constantinople. The Crusaders, fueled by a potent mix of greed, religious fervor, and a dash of opportunistic piracy, sacked the city in a brutal spree of looting and destruction. Constantinople, the jewel of Christendom, was left in ruins, its treasures carted off to faraway lands, its people scattered like leaves in the wind. In the midst of this chaos, the Byzantine Senate, already a shadow of its former self, found its final curtain call. Its dissolution was less of a dramatic finale and more of a quiet fading into obscurity. The Crusaders, more interested in plundering gold than preserving ancient political institutions, had little use for a ceremonial body that had long since lost its bite. The Senate, once a symbol of Roman continuity, was swept away in the tide of conquest, its halls silent, its legacy reduced to whispers. So, what does the story of the Byzantine Senate teach us? Well, for one, it's a masterclass in the art of political survival, or rather, the lack thereof. The Senate's tale is a testament to the enduring allure of tradition, even when that tradition has been stripped of all real power. It was an antique that emperors dusted off and displayed whenever it suited their needs, a piece of political theater that lent an air of legitimacy to their reigns. Like a vintage car that looks impressive in the driveway but won't get you far down the road, the Senate was more about appearances than action. Yet, despite its functional obsolescence, the Senate's symbolic endurance should not be underestimated. It stood as a relic of Rome's illustrious past, a nod to the grandeur of an empire that once ruled the known world. In its halls echoed the voices of senators who had walked alongside emperors and generals, shaping the destiny of nations, even if only in spirit. The Senate's mere existence was a reminder of Rome's shadow, a reminder that the past, no matter how distant, could never be entirely erased. Now, let's draw a few modern parallels, shall we? The Byzantine Senate might be long gone, but the world is still dotted with ceremonial political bodies that serve more as symbols than powerhouses. Take the British House of Lords, for example, a place where titles are hereditary, and the debates often feel like echoes of a bygone era. Or consider the many parliaments around the globe where pomp and circumstance often overshadow policy-making. These institutions are the modern heirs to the Byzantine Senate's legacy, bound by tradition and prestige, but often sidelined in the real game of politics. But here's the kicker. Tradition has its own kind of power. The Senate may not have wielded the kind of influence that shaped empires, but it served as a constant in a world of upheaval, a reminder of continuity amidst chaos. Today, ceremonial bodies still hold sway in their own way, anchoring societies to their past, while the world around them changes at breakneck speed. They're like the comforting lull of a familiar tune, a soothing reminder that while the players may change, the melody remains the same. As we wrap up this saga of the Byzantine Senate, let's not forget the lessons it imparts. It's a tale of resilience, of tradition clinging to relevance in a rapidly evolving world. It's a reminder that even in the face of obsolescence, symbols carry weight, anchoring us to the past even as we forge ahead into the unknown. The Senate may have been a relic, but its story is far from irrelevant, offering insights into the eternal dance between tradition and power. So next time you hear about a political body that seems more about show than substance, remember the Byzantine Senate. It might not have shaped empires in its twilight years, but it left a legacy that endures, a legacy of tradition, of the power of appearances, and of the timeless allure of political theater. As the dust of history settles, the Senate stands as a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between the past and the present, a dance that continues to this day in the corridors of power around the world. In the bustling, chaotic world of 6th century BC China, a tumultuous theater of warlords and philosophers, one man emerged from the shadows of history like a stealthy ninja before ninjas were even a thing. Enter Sun Tzu, the enigmatic figure whose name would later echo through the corridors of time as the mastermind behind the art of war. Ever wondered what life was like for this ancient strategist? Well, strap in, because his beginnings are as murky as the Yangtze River after a storm. Sun Tzu was born around 544 BC in the state of Kai, a place that, if it had a slogan, might have been "Every day is a battle." Kai was one of the many states caught in the relentless game of territorial chess known as the Spring and Autumn period. Imagine the political landscape as a giant map of risk, but with real blood, sweat, and tears. It's a wonder anyone had time for philosophy with all the dodging of arrows and spear thrusts. Right from the get-go, Sun Tzu's life was shrouded in more mystery than a detective novel. Was he a general who philosophized, or a philosopher who picked up a sword? It's the ultimate chicken-and-egg conundrum. One school of thought claims he was a seasoned general who penned down his battlefield wisdom. Others argue he was a thinker first, drawing theoretical lines in the sand before any real ones. Either way, you can bet his childhood wasn't spent playing with toy soldiers, unless you count learning to command real ones as play. The legend of Sun Tzu really kicks off with a story that reads like a darkly comedic episode of The Office, set in ancient China. Picture this. A king decides to test Sun Tzu's strategic skills by asking him to train a harem of concubines to become soldiers. Naturally, Sun Tzu agrees, because who wouldn't want to turn a palace party into boot camp? According to the tale, When his orders were met with giggles, he didn't hesitate to execute the king's favorite concubine to demonstrate the seriousness of discipline. Effective, certainly. Questionable HR practice, undoubtedly. But did this grim corporate training exercise actually happen? Historians are split, with some arguing it's merely a legend cooked up to enhance Sun Tzu's intimidating reputation. After all, nothing says, "Listen to me," like a story where you turn giggles into gasps. Despite its dubious authenticity, the tale endures because it encapsulates the ruthless pragmatism that the art of war champions. In a world where armies clashed like waves against a rocky shore, Sun Tzu's strategies provided a lifeboat. To really understand Sun Tzu's impact, you have to dive into the socio-political soup of his time. Ancient China was not your postcard landscape of serene rice paddies and tranquil temples. It was a cauldron of competing states, each vying for dominance, where the motto seemed to be conquer or be conquered. The spring and autumn period saw over 170 states fragment and fight, number more suited to a bizarre reality show than a manageable political ecosystem. During Sun Tzu's lifetime, consolidation and conflict were the order of the day, with states merging like corporate takeovers, only with a lot more bloodshed. Sun Tzu's birth state, Kai, was no stranger to this chaos. It was a player in the notorious Warring States period that engulfed China after the Spring and Autumn era. Kai, with its strategic location and resources, was a tasty morsel in the regional buffet of conquest. Yet it was also a place of culture and learning, where intellectuals and military minds alike could flourish. Sun Tzu's ability to straddle these worlds of thought and action is perhaps what made him a legend. His treatise, The Art of War, wasn't just about swinging swords. It was about swinging the odds in your favor. He preached the gospel of cunning over conflict, where the supreme art of war was to subdue the enemy without fighting. In a region where battles raged like wildfires, this approach was revolutionary. It was less about the size of your army and more about the size of your strategy. Sun Tzu was the original advocate for working smarter, not harder, long before that became a corporate mantra. But let's step away from the romanticized image of the serene philosopher general for a moment. Leading men into battle in ancient China was not exactly a Zen experience. It was more like trying to conduct an orchestra where half the musicians were trying to stab each other. The logistical nightmare alone would have been enough to give anyone pause. Armies needed food, weapons, and shelter, and the terrain was as unforgiving as a stone-hearted warlord. Yet somehow, amidst this chaos, Sun Tzu crafted principles that have endured for over 2 millennia. Sun Tzu's strategies were as much about psychology as they were about swords and shields. He understood that battles were won in the mind long before they were won on the field. This was a man who would have thrived in modern-day boardrooms, turning hostile takeovers into strategic victories with nothing but a steely gaze and a well-placed memo. His ideas were a precursor to the modern understanding of warfare, where intelligence and adaptability trump brute force. The enigma of Sun Tzu's early life leaves us with more questions than answers. Was he a ghostwriter for generals, or did he walk the walk he so eloquently talked? The truth, like much of history, is probably somewhere in the shaded area between fact and fable. What we do know is that his influence spanned far beyond the battlefields of ancient China. His work has been translated into more languages than a polyglot's dream, affecting military and business strategies across the globe. It's a testament to the power of his ideas that people are still quoting him today, often with a knowing nod, and a Sun Tzu said. As we ponder Sun Tzu's early years, we're reminded that history is a blend of myth and reality, a dance between what was and what might have been. Sun Tzu's life is an invitation to explore not just the man, but the world he inhabited, a world where survival was an art in itself, and where the greatest victories were those never fought. So, as we delve deeper into his story, let's keep our minds open and our skepticism sharp. After all, in the words of Sun Tzu himself, all warfare is based on deception. And who knows, maybe that's the biggest lesson he ever taught. As we pivot from the enigmatic life of Sun Tzu to his greatest legacy, the art of war, let's imagine the scene. It's around 512 BC, and Sun Tzu is probably sipping some ancient version of tea, contemplating strategies that would outlast empires. If there was ever a time for a light bulb moment, this was it. His book, The Art of War, isn't just an instruction manual for generals. It's a 13-chapter manifesto on how to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outlast your enemies, be they on the battlefield or in the boardroom. The book opens with a chapter on laying plans, which, in less poetic terms, is all about doing your homework before you charge into the fray. Sun Tzu waxes lyrical about the importance of calculation, because let's face it, in war, as in life, winging it is rarely a winning strategy. His advice: weigh your options like you're at a buffet of potential disasters, and only pick the ones you can actually stomach. It's the kind of thinking that makes you wonder if Sun Tzu would have been a consultant to the stars in today's world, guiding corporate mergers with the same deftness he applied to military campaigns. Moving on to waging war, Sun Tzu drops the bombshell. Literally. War, he argues, is expensive. We're not just talking about the cost of spears and horses. There's a whole economy of war to consider, from feeding your troops to the potential ruin of the lands you conquer. In his own version of ancient cost-benefit analysis, Sun Tzu advises that the longer a conflict drags on, the more it drains your resources. It's a sentiment that resonates even today, where prolonged conflicts can drain national treasuries and public morale alike. In Attack by Stratagem, Sun Tzu highlights the power of deception. His famous line, "All warfare is based on deception," might as well be the precursor to modern PR campaigns. It's a strategy that suggests if you can't win by sheer force, win by making your opponent think you're 10 steps ahead, when really, you're just one well-placed step away from victory. This is where Sun Tzu's teachings find a home in the hostile takeovers and strategic partnerships of modern business. The subsequent chapters delve into nitty-gritty details that might make even the most seasoned strategist reach for a stiff drink. From tactical dispositions to energy, Sun Tzu lays out how to effectively manage your troops, resources, and the battlefield itself. He advises generals to be like water, adapting their tactics to the environment and the enemy's movements. It's a lesson in flexibility that would make even a yoga instructor nod in approval. One of the lesser-known, yet delightfully quirky tales about Sun Tzu involves his approach to espionage, detailed in the use of spies. Story goes that he once disguised his soldiers as merchants to gather intelligence from enemy territories. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of corporate espionage, where you send in your best people with a convincing cover story. Sun Tzu knew that information was power long before data analytics became the buzzword of the 21st century. Now, if you're wondering how Sun Tzu's ancient wisdom translates into today's world, look no further than the modern military and business schools that treat the art of war as a sacred text. CEOs quote it in boardrooms, generals teach it in war colleges, and self-help gurus package it as timeless advice for personal success. It's been translated into over 30 languages, and its applications stretch from the battlefields of World War II to the corporate jungles of Wall Street. Sun Tzu's treatise is a constant reminder that sometimes the best battle is the one you never have to fight. His emphasis on strategy over brute force is a lesson that resonates with the modern mantra of working smarter, not harder. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The stark reality is that the art of war was born from an era where survival often meant outmaneuvering your neighbor before they did the same to you. It's as much a product of its time as it is a timeless guide. Speaking of timeless, let's debunk a few myths. Did Sun Tzu really write every word? Some scholars suggest the art of war might be a compilation of military wisdom from various sources, later attributed to him for the sake of narrative clarity or to boost book sales, if we're being cynical. Yet the legend of Sun Tzu as the sole author persists, because who doesn't love the idea of a lone genius changing the course of history with a quill and some papyrus? While we're at it, let's sprinkle in some humor. One anecdote that surfaces from the depths of history claims Sun Tzu once advised a king to dress his troops in pink to confuse the enemy. While this sounds like an oddball tactic that could only have arisen from one too many sips of fermented tea, it encapsulates his knack for unpredictability. Whether it's true or not, the story persists, perhaps more for its entertainment value than historical accuracy. As we wrap up this chapter on Sun Tzu's magnum opus, let's remember, the art of war is as much about the art of life as it is about warfare. Its principles of adaptability, foresight, and cunning apply whether you're leading troops into battle or just trying to navigate the chaos of daily life. So, as we continue to unravel the layers of Sun Tzu's legacy, keep this in mind. The true art of war might just be the art of living wisely. And speaking of living wisely, let's pivot back to Sun Tzu himself, the man who went from the murky shadows of history to center stage in the state of Wu. Now, if you've been imagining Sun Tzu as a lone wolf, plotting his strategies in a quiet corner while sipping on some metaphorical ancient coffee, it's time for a reality check. Our boy Sun Tzu was no isolated genius. He was a part of a much larger, chaotic symphony of war, politics, and logistics. And nowhere is this more evident than in the Wuchu Wars. Let's set the scene. It's the 6th century BC, and China is like a giant game of Survivor, but with actual survival on the line. Enter the state of Wu, a rising power looking to flex its muscles against its formidable neighbor, Chu. Chu was the big kid on the block, with vast territories and resources that made it the envy and target of its neighbors. The Wuchu rivalry was like a soap opera with swords, long-standing grudges, betrayals, and the ever-present threat of war. Sun Tzu, having found his way to the court of King Helu of Wu, was about to play a pivotal role in this drama. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking he was the sole puppet master. The state of Wu had a veritable dream team of strategists and warriors, including the likes of Wu Zixu, a statesman with a vendetta as fiery as a summer in the Sinai. Wu Zixu's personal beef with Chu was legendary. He had a score to settle, having watched his family suffer at the hands of the Chu state. As Wu prepared to launch its campaign against Chu, Sun Tzu was likely up to his neck in battle plans and logistics. The logistics of war in ancient China were a nightmare that would make modern supply chain managers break out in a cold sweat. Armies needed to be fed, clothed, and armed, and all this had to be done while maneuvering through terrain that wasn't exactly paved with yellow bricks. Think mountains, rivers, and forests that seemed designed to thwart any advancing army. Now, Sun Tzu's name is inextricably linked with the Battle of Baju in 506 BC, a clash that would become the stuff of legend. But let's not buy into the Hollywood version where Sun Tzu single-handedly leads the charge with a dramatic soundtrack in the background. The reality was a bit more nuanced. The Battle of Baju was a team effort that involved not just brilliant strategy, but also a lot of old-fashioned grit and determination. The Wu forces, under the joint command of Sun Tzu and the vengeful Wu Zixu, faced a Chu army that was both larger and better equipped. It sounds like a classic underdog story, but here's where things get interesting. Sun Tzu and his cohorts executed a series of cunning maneuvers that would make even the most seasoned chess player nod in approval. They launched a surprise attack by crossing the Yangtze River, a logistical feat in itself, and then used deception to draw the Chu forces into a trap. Now, here's where the myth-busting comes in. The tale often paints Sun Tzu as a lone genius, orchestrating every move from the shadows. But the reality is that this victory was a culmination of teamwork, strategic alliances, and yes, a bit of luck. Wu's victory at Baju wasn't just about clever tactics. It was about exploiting Chu's overconfidence and internal divisions. In the grand chess game of ancient Chinese warfare, Sun Tzu was a master player, but he wasn't playing alone. The battle had significant economic implications too. War was expensive, and a victory could be as financially draining as a loss. The spoils of war had to outweigh the costs, and in the case of Wu, the conquest of Chu territories promised rich rewards. Chu was replete with resources, fertile lands, strategic river routes, and manpower. For Wu, the victory was not just a military triumph, but an economic windfall. But let's pause on the romance for a second and consider the gritty reality. The aftermath of Baju wasn't all glory and gold. The logistical efforts to maintain control over the newly conquered territories were monumental. Wu's forces had to secure supply lines, manage local populations, and fend off any attempts by Chu to reclaim lost ground. It was like winning a high-stakes poker game, only to realize you have to guard your winnings with your life. As we navigate through Sun Tzu's journey, it's tempting to get swept up in the grandeur of his legend. But behind every great figure is a story of collaboration, compromise, and a fair bit of chaos. Sun Tzu's rise to prominence in Wu was as much about being in the right place at the right time as it was about his strategic brilliance. He was a cog in a much larger machine, one that required the efforts of countless unnamed soldiers, advisors, and allies. So, as we continue to unravel the layers of Sun Tzu's legacy, let's keep our eyes peeled for both the myth and the reality. His story is a reminder that history is rarely the tale of a single hero. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads of human endeavor. The real art of war, it seems, is not just about strategy, but about the delicate balance of personalities, politics, and practicalities. As we leave the battlefield of Baju behind, the next chapter in Sun Tzu's life promises even more intrigue and insight. And so, with the dust of Baju settling, we find ourselves on the cusp of new challenges and opportunities for Sun Tzu and the state of Wu. The narrative doesn't end here, far from it. This is just one act in the grand play of Sun Tzu's life. So stick around as we continue to explore the extraordinary world of 6th century BC China, where strategy, survival, and a bit of serendipity ruled the day. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. With the dust of Baju settling, we're left to ponder the curious metamorphosis of Sun Tzu from a relatively obscure strategist to the poster boy for strategic genius. Picture a time long after the Wuchu Wars, when the legends surrounding Sun Tzu began to take on a life of their own, growing like a tall tale told around countless campfires. But how did Sun Tzu's image get polished to a gleam that still dazzles us today, centuries after he first scribbled down his thoughts on parchment? Let's start by addressing the elephant in the room, the myths. Sun Tzu's legend has been buffed up to the point that he's practically the Chuck Norris of ancient strategists. Everything from the infamous concubine drill sergeant story to his supposed authorship of every word in The Art of War is part of this myth-making machine. The reality: it's likely that Sun Tzu was one component of a broader tradition of military thought, a figurehead rather than a solitary genius. Yet, the allure of a singular mind-crafting timeless wisdom is just too irresistible for storytellers across the ages. Jumping across the centuries, Sun Tzu's strategic wisdom found its way into the heart of Western culture. His ideas were adopted by everyone from Napoleon Bonaparte to modern CEOs who quote The Art of War like it's the Bible of boardroom battles. This cross-cultural adoption was no accident. By the time Sun Tzu's work reached the West, it had been repackaged, translated, and interpreted through countless lenses, each adding a layer of polish to his already shiny reputation. In the economic context, Sun Tzu's strategies weren't just philosophical musings. They had real-world implications. Consider the cost of war in ancient China. Feeding an army wasn't like ordering takeout. It involved logistics that could rival a modern military operation. An army of 30,000 men, a modest size by ancient standards, needed an estimated 300 tons of grain per day. Sun Tzu recognized that prolonging conflict was about as financially wise as burning your paycheck. Sun Tzu's emphasis on the economy of war, winning without fighting, was revolutionary. In a world where the price of war could bankrupt a state, his strategies offered a way to preserve resources and maintain stability. This wasn't just about saving money. It was a blueprint for longevity in a time when kingdoms fell as quickly as they rose. And what about peace? The cost of maintaining peace was another economic burden. Sun Tzu's treatise implied that peace, like war, required strategy. Ensuring stability meant managing alliances, securing borders, and sometimes engaging in a little espionage. These weren't just philosophical concepts. They were practical necessities in a world where a misstep could lead to annihilation. Now, let's scrutinize how Sun Tzu's image was polished over time. As the centuries rolled on, his name became synonymous with strategic brilliance. Remember, this was a time when stories were passed down orally, and each retelling added a new layer of shine. By the time The Art of War was translated into French in the 18th century, Sun Tzu was already a legend, his reputation burnished by centuries of retelling. But here's the kicker. The idea of Sun Tzu as a lone genius was never the whole story. The romantic notion of a solitary figure crafting perfect strategies oversimplifies a much messier reality. The truth is, Sun Tzu was part of a tradition, a culture of strategic thought that spanned generations. His ideas were not created in isolation, but were part of a broader discourse on warfare and governance. Yet, the myth persists. And perhaps that's because it fills a narrative need. People crave stories of singular genius. It's more palatable than the complex web of influences and collaborations that history often is. Sun Tzu's myth endures not because it's true, but because it's compelling. It's a reminder that sometimes the legend is more comforting than the reality. Speaking of reality, let's not forget the practicalities of war and peace that Sun Tzu's strategies addressed. In the aftermath of the Wuchu conflict, the economic implications were profound. Conquered territories required administration, resources had to be managed, and the delicate balance of power needed constant attention. Sun Tzu's insights into the cost of war were a precursor to modern economic theories about conflict and resource management. So, as we peer through the mists of time, trying to catch a glimpse of the real Sun Tzu, what do we see? A man, certainly, also a myth, a figure whose life and work have been shaped by both history and legend. In the end, maybe the real art of war is the art of storytelling, the ability to craft a narrative that endures through the ages. As we continue our exploration of Sun Tzu's legacy, remember, the truth is often more complex than the stories we tell. But isn't that what makes history so endlessly fascinating? Stay tuned, because the tale of Sun Tzu is far from over. So, as we continue our journey through the labyrinthine legacy of Sun Tzu, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of a 6th century BC strategist becoming a 21st century corporate guru. Seriously, if someone had told Sun Tzu he'd one day be advising both generals and CEOs, he'd probably have raised an eyebrow and asked for a strong cup of tea. Yet here we are, in a world where The Art of War is as likely to be found on the shelves of a Fortune 500 executive as it is in a military academy. Fast forward a few millennia from the dusty battlefields of ancient China to the sleek boardrooms of modern capitalism. Sun Tzu's teachings have found a new home in the business world, where hostile takeovers aren't just a military maneuver, but a daily reality. His principles of outsmarting opponents, knowing when to fight, and when to negotiate are plastered across PowerPoint presentations like a strategic mantra. The concept of winning without fighting resonates deeply in a world where market shares are the new territories to conquer. But here's where things get interesting. While Sun Tzu's strategies are quoted like gospel, they're also often misinterpreted. Take his advice on deception, for instance. In the business world, this has sometimes been twisted into permission for shady practices. Think insider trading or corporate espionage disguised as competitive intelligence. Sun Tzu would probably be the first to raise a skeptical eyebrow at these interpretations, as his teachings emphasized strategic brilliance over skullduggery. Yet, as with any classic, interpretations vary wildly. Sun Tzu's ideas have been stretched, bent, and occasionally mangled to fit narratives he never could have imagined. His counsel on knowing your enemy, it's been translated into exhaustive market research and competitive analysis, where companies spend billions, that's right, billions with a B, annually dissecting every move of their rivals. In 2019 alone, the global market research industry was valued at a staggering $76 billion, a testament to Sun Tzu's lasting influence. And let's not overlook the military, where the art of war remains a staple text. From West Point to Sandhurst, aspiring generals are drilled in Sun Tzu's methodologies. His emphasis on adaptability and psychological insight has been a guiding star for military leaders throughout history. During World War II, General Douglas MacArthur was known to carry a copy with him, and it's rumored that Napoleon was a fan too, although whether he took it to Waterloo is anyone's guess. But here's the rub. Interpreting Sun Tzu isn't as straightforward as following a recipe. His work is as much about philosophy as it is about strategy, and that's where the misinterpretations often creep in. The romantic image of Sun Tzu as a master tactician sometimes overshadows the deeper, more nuanced lessons about human nature and conflict. His teachings aren't just a playbook for war or business. They're a meditation on the human condition, with all its messy, unpredictable glory. As we delve deeper into Sun Tzu's enduring appeal, it's crucial to recognize the economic backdrop against which his ideas were formed. Ancient China was a hotbed of economic activity, where states vied for resources like food, land, and labor. The cost of maintaining an army was astronomical, Estimates suggest that supporting a force of 100,000 men could require up to 1,000 tons of grain daily. Sun Tzu's strategies weren't just about winning. They were about winning efficiently, conserving resources, and ensuring the state's survival. This economic pragmatism is perhaps why his teachings have struck a chord across cultures and centuries. In an era where the cost of conflict, both human and financial, is scrutinized like never before, Sun Tzu's emphasis on strategic foresight and resource management is as relevant as ever. His legacy reminds us that war, whether fought with swords or spreadsheets, is a costly endeavor, and that true victory often lies in avoiding conflict altogether. Now, let's take a step back and reflect on the myths and realities of Sun Tzu's life. The legend of the lone genius, crafting perfect strategies in isolation, is appealing, but it's also misleading. Sun Tzu was part of a tradition, a continuum of military thought that spanned generations. His work, while groundbreaking, was not created in a vacuum. It was a product of its time, influenced by the political, social, and economic realities of ancient China. Yet, the allure of the myth endures because it speaks to something deeply human, the desire to find order in chaos, to believe in the power of a single mind to change the world. The story of Sun Tzu is as much about the stories we tell ourselves as it is about the man himself. His life is a puzzle, a fascinating blend of fact and fiction that continues to captivate us. In the final analysis, Sun Tzu's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of ideas. His teachings have transcended time and culture, finding relevance in contexts he could never have imagined. From the battlefields of ancient China to the boardrooms of modern corporations, his wisdom continues to guide those who seek to understand the complexities of conflict and competition. So, as we wrap up our exploration of Sun Tzu, let's remember that history is as much about the myths we create as the facts we uncover. The true art of war, it seems, may lie not just in strategy, but in the stories that endure. And in that sense, Sun Tzu's greatest legacy might just be the tale of his own life, a narrative that, much like the world he lived in, is rich, complex, and endlessly fascinating.